Herpetoculture, no, Project Herpetoculture.
There it is.
Definitely one of the podcasts I always look forward to listening to, and listening to back, honestly, with Phil and Roy and
Yeah.
all the amazing guests they had on. It was definitely a really, well, it's still really good just to listen back, because you guys had like 100 shows, right?
Yeah, we've got about 100 now, and I'm up doing them again. So I'm still like, Roy's not gonna record with me anymore, but I'm gonna keep the show going. So I've put out 3 or 4 now since I started it up again. I had to take a break when we had my son, just because babies will take up your time, and we tried pretty hard to have some stuff kind of planned and canned and ready to go and release in the interim, and we did okay with that. But just it eventually it just became like I can't do a kid and this show right now at the exact same time. So we took, I think it ended up being about 10 months that we were off from recording. But then we came back kind of with a bang. I was able to get Ron to come back on for Ron St. Pierre to come back on for a comeback show. I've had a handful of interviews on other shows or in other contexts that I asked to use that recording so I could upload and just kind of buff out and get more recordings now myself. So I'm doing really good. I'm back in a groove. So I'm like two or three episodes ahead of what's actually released. So that helps a lot. But I'm really happy to do it again because I love doing the show. I'm glad to hear that you enjoy it. I'm glad you like it. Mind if I ask you, do you happen to have a favorite one, or can you, if you don't mind me asking,
Well,
is
there's
there a
probably
show that
there's
stands
probably
out
a
in your,
couple of them, right?
yeah,
Obviously, as like more of a West Texas colubrid kind of keeper, I
okay,
really like the Craig Trumbauer one. Like,
yeah,
I feel like you guys were able to pull some different stuff out of him. Smitty actually was able to pull some other stuff too, but I think you
yeah,
guys were able to get the most interesting answers out of like all of the kind of interviews he's done,
nice,
which I thought was awesome, right? Like some of
yeah,
those Crotalus stories and
yeah,
back in the 70s and that. I thought that was pretty cool. And
yeah, it's fun.
then
Yeah, keep
obviously
going.
like Ron and
Yeah, Ron's good.
Philippe de. I think
Yeah,
you guys had Alan on, right, too, for
yep, we had
Apache.
Alan.
Yeah, I
Yep,
like
yep,
that one. I
that's a good one too.
for like I love the keeping part of the hobby, but for some reason, like that bit of business and entrepreneurship
Yeah,
kind of sparks like a little interest kind of
yeah,
thing. Like even if like you're like, I don't think I could do like breed animals for a
yeah,
living necessarily, just because of wanting to keep it as like a fun hobby. Just
yeah,
like no, well, you don't in the reptile hobby, you don't necessarily have to breed animals to
sure,
make an empire kind of thing. You can make
yeah,
foods, you could make feeders, you could build cages, right? So
sure,
I find that really fascinating, honestly, like hearing about
yeah.
all that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I mean, that's the kind of thing that interests me the most. Not necessarily specifically the business aspect of it, just the sort of like the broad scope that when we say herpetoculture, people think like, oh, it's just the definition. It's just breeding and selling reptiles and amphibians, right? Or culturing or breeding and raising reptiles and amphibians. But really, it's herpetoculture is an entire economy that's embedded in sort of the pre-existing infrastructure of whatever the US and world economy looks like, right? So if you could say that it would be interesting to learn about the process of uh you know how they make an iPhone, or uh how an app is developed, or how someone started a business or whatever, like all of that is true inside herpetoculture too. Like it's not just unique to the tech sector or to like the food system here I mean, everything about how herpetoculture works, all the things that hold it up from the ground up, all of the people who participate in it, all of the ways you can participate in it, and all the different looks, like the different frames of reference you can take on the same subject, all gives you various insights on what makes this whole thing so freaking cool. So I feel like there's a handful of shows that I enjoy listening to as well, that I like, that I'll pay attention to, that I think are making really, really interesting stuff. But I think the goal that I have with the show generally speaking, is basically to have, you know, like the widest encompassing show about herpetoculture that I can possibly come up with. So, you know, we, I say we, but I forget Roy's not doing it anymore. God, I gotta quit saying I guess it feels so awkward to make it all about me. But um, I am trying to get everyone I can think of on the show, right? I have, for example, I have two shows coming up, or yeah, two shows coming up with people who started circuits of expos, like large national expos. I have shows coming up with people who are just specific to blood pythons or fire skinks. I have shows coming up with people who have started major brands that I can't exactly say which yet at the moment, just to keep it kind of under wraps, you know. And then just the one I just released recently, a couple days ago, was just a solo show with me talking, just doing a deep dive on uromastics, because that's sort of like my primary focus, right? So in my mind, any branch that you could take from those starting points, from any of the foundational starting points we can think of in herpetoculture, from the history of it all the way to the future of it, anything you can think of in there, that's kind of what I want the show to be about, broadly speaking, even though each individual episode might be very, very specific. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. So first of all, Phil, welcome to the show. I think Michael forgot the whole intro and everything
Oh, my bad.
on how to start a show. No, it's okay. It's Michael. We love him anyway.
Yeah.
So welcome to the show. Happy to have you on.
Thank you.
Just by curiosity, man, how? So two questions regarding your
Sure.
podcast. Number one, are you thinking of bringing somebody on? Or are you going to keep
Yeah.
doing it alone? And two, how the heck did you do a show on your own, man? I find that to be like the most difficult thing to do. And the only person I know that truly does it well, and I'll be honest, I haven't heard a show of you alone, is Stephen Cush. Stephen Cush can do a really good show on his own. I haven't heard you do a show on your own, but how do you do that? And
okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. So so let's see. The show itself, how do you do it on my own? I don't know yet, honestly. Like do you mean like the actual recording, like the interview process alone?
I was actually definitely talking about that, like doing a show on your own, like basically no guests, no partner, where you're just talking and talking and talking. And like, again, the only one I've heard do properly was Steve Cush, and
sure,
I don't get how the heck he does that. So I'm curious, is that what you meant by doing it alone?
Yeah. Dude, yeah. So Steve is yes, I am. So when I say doing it alone, I meant that was a solo show where it was just me talking, right? So that's one thing. And then what I mean by doing it alone is I had a co-host, right? It was Roy Arthur Blodgett at Wellspring, and he had to step back just because his life is getting wild and in good ways, right? So he's got other stuff. He's bigger fish to fry. He doesn't have time for the show anymore. As far as if I'll bring another person on, like right now I'm thinking about just doing it alone for the time being. But that's mostly related to the fact that it's hard to coordinate with two folks, I mean, you can get into a groove and you can get really regular and set times and everything. But as soon as you have two hosts that have to be there and they have their own schedules, and then you have to coordinate with the guest, that's not, as you guys know, is not always the easiest thing in the world. So and the way it started with Roy, I mean, genuinely, I just was having really good conversations with Roy in our DMs on Instagram. We would just do voice notes back and forth just about bullshit. And it was like, man, we should just record all of this. This is all really interesting stuff, and so if I brought another person on the show, which I'm open-minded to, it has to happen like pretty organically. Like I don't want to go interviewing people and then go through the whole thing and try to figure out who I'm vibing with, because sometimes that comes up, that rapport between you and another person comes up organically and in a way that you kind of you can't plan for it. You have to wait and see if it shows up, so that's possible. I'd like it because I like not being the only one doing the talking. As far as recording a solo show and how do you do that? Listen, I'm verbose and I'm loud and I have a lot of energy and I'm arrogant and opinionated. So that makes it pretty easy to just talk, whether or not that necessarily lives up to the quality that I'm searching for. Admittedly, if you're only 100 shows deep and you've only done a few of them solo, what kind of practice have you really had, right? Which is basically zero. So my assumption is that as I practice more, as I do that kind of thing more, I prepared for it. I had notes, so I think as long as I continue to go down that path where I continue to work on my preparation, continue to work on my speaking, because sometimes my thoughts are moving faster than my mouth can keep up with regard to the sort of topics I'm trying to cover. So I have to learn to slow down. I probably have to learn to stop saying and like and things like this. I have a lot of filler in my speech, but I don't find it that difficult at the moment, but that's just because I'm a really talkative human being. If I was more introverted and a quieter person, I'm sure I would find it especially difficult, but that's not who I am. So at the moment, it's not super hard, but time will tell. Might get quieter as I get older. I don't know. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. I listened to that recent show and I thought it was pretty good. Like obviously,
deep dive?
Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
I had to listen to it.
Sick. Good.
Yeah,
You thought it was okay?
Oh yeah, I thought it was good. Like
Good.
obviously, some people are like maybe not used to having no guests or whatever. So
Sure.
But I thought it was fantastic, and for people who want to get into
Sweet.
Euromastics, right? They're probably gonna go to, like, I know when I help vend my buddy's table, and he buys Euromastics from Elizabeth in Quebec.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
she's amazing.
he sells her captive bred stuff at shows out here.
Sure.
And when I'm always like, well, just go to Arids Only's page. They have a fantastic, like, I give them the basic rundown of what I've learned, but then it's like,
Sure.
he has a fantastic care sheet on there that you will definitely want to go look at and
Sick.
nail down, right? Because we usually get usually it's oscillateds and ornates, which
Sure.
Every time you're like, should I get some of these?
Yeah. The answer is yes on that. You definitely should. But it's funny. So Elizabeth is great. She's been bringing Euros longer than me. And when I was working on my first couple of years of trying to get things sorted, she was one of 2 or 3 people who I was asking a lot of questions to, so I have a great deal of respect for her. And I'm glad you liked it. I listen to a number of podcasts that have solo shows on them. So I find the solo show thing, it seems reasonable. And, at least when it comes to the Euros, I still have lots of other people who I'd like to have on the show who are maybe specific to Euros, who I haven't been able to have on the show just yet, like Thomas Wilms or Elizabeth. I'd love to have her on. I don't know, I think she's French. I'm not sure. She speak good English? Do you know? I have no idea.
I have no idea.
Okay.
Her website's half French, half English, so I'm not sure. But
Je peux faire la présentation pour toi en français si tu veux.
There we go. You want to be my translator for that show, man? Yeah. So yeah. So I don't want the solo show part to be. That's not going to be the most common thing that I do going forward. But I kind of think about the solo show and some of the other information that you mentioned as sort of part and parcel to what I do. I read my care guide out loud verbally on YouTube just to have like another way for someone to digest the care sheet, right? I have the care sheet that's on my website now, which is like the 3rd or 4th iteration of that care guide, right? I've updated it multiple times. And so some of the not updated versions are floating around out in the world. So it's, I could get a little bit more organized, have lots of content on my YouTube as well outside the care guide, where it's just sort of one-off videos about how to set this up or what to expect when you're expecting a Euro, stuff like this. And maybe my hope is that at some point in the future, I'll be able to basically hire someone to organize it all for me. You know what I mean? Because right now it's just sort of uploaded in sequential order, and that's it. That's sort of the extent of the organization that I have as a part of that. But the whole goal is to try to give people as many ways of ingesting the information as possible. I wrote the care guide so many years ago, and I thought, okay, I wrote the care guide. I'm done. Now I can just refer people to the care guide when there's questions that it's like, when it's really easy questions or whatever stuff I can just send people to. I can say, hey, go read the care guide. But eventually I realized that it wasn't sufficient just because, even speaking for myself, like I don't take everything. I don't take in all of my information by reading. Some of it I read, some of it I listen to a book or a podcast. Sometimes I'm watching a video. Sometimes I'm looking at wild photos. Sometimes I'm reading a paper. You know what I mean? So there's just so many different ways that we all take in information. So I'm trying to put out as much info in every form that I know how, you know. Yeah, this is great seeing the care guide set like this. This is a basic way. So this is just another way of throwing out that info. Oh, that spacing drives me nuts, but that's okay.
Right. So, Phil, just by curiosity, I know a lot of people probably know you, know where you come from.
Mhm,
I'm not going to ask you to go through the whole like where you came from, how you got into
mhm.
herpetoculture, but how about we go more into what do you keep,
Yeah,
and maybe a quick 30-second blurb on where you fit in herpetoculture, and
sure. Yeah,
you know, kind of like that kind of stuff. So collection slash where you fit in and go in there.
sure.
You don't need to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
into your whole backstory, but just for people like me who I've only listened to your podcast, that's about the extent that I know of you.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So, the primary thing that I think if anyone knows the work that I do, it's usually because of uromastics. I've been keeping and breeding any of the species available in the United States as far as uromastics goes for, coming up on 50. I've been keeping them for like 25 years, but I've been breeding them for about 15. And in recent years, I've reduced that total number of diversity. So now, primarily working with Ornata, J. and Thomasai are the three primary focal points of uromastics that I keep. I have one species of Sara, which is the Sara hardwickii, which is the Indian uromastics. They used to be uromastics, but then got split into Sara in 2008 or 2009, I believe. I can't remember which. And then, I also keep and work with chuckwallas. I work with Xenogama taylori, which is the shield-tailed agama, right? Really been working with those for, I don't know, like coming up on 9 years, 8, 9 years now, so a good long while on the Xenogama. And then a handful of tortoise species as sort of like side projects, right? Like a few Greek tortoises, some Russians, some hingeback tortoises, and then I also have San Esteban Island spiny-tailed iguanas, which is Tenasera conspicuosa. Yeah, those are the Xenogama. Those are awesome. So those are super great. Those are great pictures of them. And then I don't think I have any of the San Esteban Islands up there just yet. But that's only because I haven't bred them yet. They're just I've only been raising up the individuals, the three individuals that I have to get them ready for breeding. I'm hoping to breed them this coming spring here in 2026. So that's the primary breakdown of the species that I work with. I've been doing this since I was a kid. So I'm 38 now. I've been keeping reptiles since I was tiny and small, catching snakes and salamanders in the backyard, reptiles and amphibians. So I've been doing it for a long time. And then about 2 years ago or so is when maybe more than 2 years ago, the podcast came up, right? So we've the Project Herpetoculture podcast. And then I don't know, sometime in the last few years, the 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 broad thrust of what I do has expanded to not just be the animals. Now I sort of traffic in information, right? I try to put out information about the philosophical side of herpetoculture, and that can include history, that can include speculation about what the future might look like, speculation about creative ways we might reimagine aspects of herpetoculture that are sort of pre-existing now, and then also a little bit about now I'm also doing a food. So I started making this mixture that I make for the uromastics, and so now I'm making this food, and I've given myself another job to do, which is mix and bag all this crap that I feed the euros. But it's all fun stuff. So it's sort of an ever evolving thing, but you could condense it to uromastics and information.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I just looked it up, and
Yeah,
it's been 3.5 years since you started Project Herpetoculture. Mid 2022.
that's surreal. That's hard to believe. I can't believe it. That's super. Like when you said we've done it, because I realized that we're at 97 shows, which feels super weird. Like I remember being stoked when we were like, we got 10, we got to 10 shows, it's like, okay. And so now, and then I look at other people who have thousands of shows and I'm like, all right, we got a long way to go here. Yeah. So it's cool. That's good to know. It's just 2022. I'm not very good with dates, so I don't always remember when things happened. I have to like commit some of that stuff to memory. So I'll try to remember mid 2022 is when we started this. Thanks for that tidbit.
No worries. Yeah, I'm starting to find now as like life's getting busier, like stuff starts to kind of just mush together.
Tell me about it.
Like the
Yeah.
job I'm doing now, it's like, oh, I've only been doing this for a couple of years, and you're like, damn, I've been doing it for like four years now or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It just all and podcasts, right? Like re-listening to podcasts, you're like at some point you're like, oh, I remember every single NPR episode from
Yeah.
like re-listening back to as long as Spotify has it kind of thing till
Sure.
back when I was listening. So from 2013 to 2020, right? That time, and you're like, oh, I know everything, and then you're just like it's all just like a mush.
It's all
Mushing.
mush. Yeah.
You pick out parts that you remember, right? But then some of it you have to re-listen, and then I remember that show now.
Yeah, I mean that's another part of the reason why I've started making trying to make like informative content, right? Because some of it's just stuff that I think about, because like I'm just sitting around here picking up shit half the day. You know what I mean? So like while I'm doing that, I'm thinking about various things, and sometimes something will come up in my head and I'll be like, I want to remember this. So if I make a post about it and if I write about it and I expand on that topic, it helps me kind of commit it to memory, and it helps me refine whatever it is that initial thought was. It really is like a creative process. It's very generative and very like I liken it to art all the time. I went to college for art and design with a focus in illustration, and so it makes it easy for me to see this whole process as like very much like a generative art project on some level, but it just happens to have like a biological and philosophical twist. So it's some of that issue with committing things to memory is sort of why I continue to keep making stuff and putting stuff out there.
Oh yeah, that's very fair. I could see having like that just made me think of like Nick Mutton with how he builds his all his what are they, lineage charts. And how he keeps his site fully updated all the time, kind of thing.
Yes.
That's how probably he commits a lot of stuff to memory.
Yeah.
I feel like you could have like a great conversation with him just about like how you're honestly like, right, like all these animals that we breed are almost like an art form because they're not necessarily wild animals anymore.
Not even close.
They're just bred in boxes.
Yeah.
In a way that we want them, right? Because we usually pick certain animals that we want to pair, whether they're the best ones or they're just ones that we like a little characteristic about.
Sure.
Or maybe we think they're more normal looking, so we want to make some more normal looking ones, but still they're not still not natural, right?
Yeah. So So by the way, Nick Mutton, if he's listening to this, I would love to talk to you on the show. I'm familiar with your work. It's amazing. So let's talk. Something I would like to say though is about the part where you said the wild animals, right? So I kind of make a two-part argument. One is that they're not really wild anymore at all. Like the second they get here, they're not really a wild animal, right? Okay. Yes, a fresh import, it's pretty wild. Its state of mind is a wild state of mind. But after 10 years, it's not a wild state of mind anymore, or at least it's sufficiently changed to where I wouldn't call it a wild animal in the same way. But the other thing is, I think wild is more of to call something wild is more like a context, or not a context, but wildness is like a behavior, So like we would talk about an animal that even if it was captive bred by 10 generations, if it happens to be a little bit crazy, maybe not very friendly, goes to a new home, people would describe it as wild, or, oh, he's like a wild animal. He's totally like his ancestors, sort of whatever it is. But the wild is ill-defined. Right. So are we talking about because let me give you like a thought experiment that I screw around with sometimes on my show, which is in one of my Sarahard Wikii enclosures, for the beginning part of the summer, I had a spider that had taken up residence, a little jumping spider that had taken up residence under the stone that was right. It was like a stone that was sitting on one of the hides for the lizard, and he had taken up residence in there, and he was just chilling. Is that animal wild or is it not? Is that an animal in captivity? Because he's in a house, in a basement, in a cage. So, but obviously, I didn't put him there. Theoretically, he's sort of free to come and go as he pleases, right? But it really isn't about his context, right? He might be trapped in here for the rest of his life. So he's not necessarily wild in the traditional sense that we would think about it, right? He's more of like a the term that I've been using is he's what I would call liminal wildlife. So foxes that run, the foxes that run around in the UK and eat people's cat food that they put out on their porch, or the coyotes that live in Central Park, or the the lizard that lives on the or the gecko that lives in the hotel in Costa Rica, like an open air hotel, and it lives inside the walls of the hotel, but it they breed there, they eat there, they die there, they're born there. But it's like it's not the same thing as wild, right? It's also not. It would bring up a whole other topic, which is like why I disagree with the separation between human settlement and the wild in the first place. Like, but that's a philosophical orientation. It's not necessarily like a hard, I couldn't back that up with data in the same way. It's just, again, it's just a philosophical orientation. But like, I think that particular question kind of changes, because we all envision the wild as like this pristine place that's untouched by human interference, but that's just not real, right? There's no spot on the globe that isn't affected in some way by human interference or human interaction. And it doesn't take an animal very much movement to get to a point where almost everything it does is in touch with human interaction on some level, right? It doesn't mean the wild as a concept is invaluable. It doesn't mean we shouldn't preserve wild places. Like, of course we should, all of those things. But, uh, I like to think about, if we think about wildness as a behavior, well, then it feels like a little bit easier to sort of transplant things from one context to another. Because just because just because this spider was inside a cage here in my house, doesn't mean I wouldn't treat it as like a wild thing. I'd kind of give it its opportunities and its options, and I'd kind of leave it to its own devices and leave it alone, right? I might get in there if I really cared about it. Maybe I'd make sure it's okay every day. I might give it food. But I don't know. Maybe this isn't necessarily getting down to any hard point. It's just this is one of those things that I like to think about and talk about all the time, because the way something is wild and what its quote wild state would look like is how we inform everything we do. But if we understand that as sort of like a nebulous, somewhat nebulous definition, we'll even get more flexible about like what we mean by wild animal, and sort of how we look at the whole project of herpetoculture as art in the first place. It's more of a collaborative feedback loop with the animals than it is just us giving them fancy paint jobs at the end of the day. I'm sure Nick Mutton would have a lot of cool shit to talk about this. So.
Oh yeah, that honestly makes me almost now think about the Ipers and how they and other people that keep like a portion of their collection outside.
Yeah.
And how those animals are totally not, you wouldn't call them necessarily fully wild, but they're experiencing like birds flying over, and they get actual natural UV and sunlight and proper kind of heat radiation coming from the sun, right?
Yeah.
So then, like, as like I think Eric Burke said, when he went and touched Scott's imbricata, the southwestern carpet python, and they were like their skin was just thicker. Like you could just feel it felt like a wild animal. And then like you get, I think, turtles and goannas that you keep outside, like they're gonna be a bit more on edge. They're a bit more like they probably not as on edge as if they were wild, but you obviously hear some stories of some being way more skittish, while some are probably like just on edge to an extent, maybe because they can actually properly see due to us in captivity keeping stuff with not the correct lighting, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Like I think Scott's talked about how like UV from the sun and then UV coming from a light. Maybe not this specifically, but reptiles have a probably see in a different wavelength than we do.
Yeah,
So they
definitely.
might not see. They might theoretically be partially blind or colorblind, being
Mhm.
kept inside almost. Which
Yeah.
is kind of a good food for thought thing as well.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, the other thing is those animals that you're mentioning, like let's say you have something that's kept. So the distinction that people will always call to this point in the argument is say, oh well, you know, the difference between a wild animal and a captive animal is like the wild animal can leave whenever it wants. And it's like, well, this is okay, yeah, like maybe, but not really on some level. We all know about natural barriers, right? Whether they be a river or a mountain range or a predator, right? I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why the movement and sort of free uh general behavior of an animal is going to be restricted by all kinds of factors. Most of it's just a matter of scale. So it's like, okay, maybe over, you know, in Arizona, the Gila River restricts the movement of chuckwallas and collared lizards across that river because they can't cross the river. But that's a huge feature. It's not the same thing as a box. You know what I mean? So I obviously I totally acknowledge that. I'm not trying to play mental gymnastics in a way that makes it seem like there's no difference between the wild and being kept indoors. I obviously acknowledge that too. It's just I think that these are helpful ways of framing the way we do this because you know, if you're thinking about that particular thing, you're probably going to be taking better care of the animals, you know, because you're thinking a little bit more deeply about what it is they're doing and why they're doing it and what they might prefer, what they might not prefer. And you know, just because something is wild and exists in the wild also doesn't make it automatically a good thing, you know. So it's I love the way the Ipers do their work. Actually, they were on the show too. I'd love to have them back on and talk more because we had a great conversation and I think there'd be a whole hell of a lot more to shoot the shit about with them. God damn, I got to really get back on our old guest list and see if people want to come back on for a second run.
Yeah, if I can give my own opinion on the wild, there's also another factor that I think it differs here, and I think it'll have to do with the intelligence of the animal. And what I mean by that is, take any mammal, whether it be a lion, an elephant, whatever, raise it in captivity, have its young raised in captivity, all that. You take that animal, you plop it in the wild, it's gonna die. It's gonna die instantly. When you compare it to an animal like a reptile, you take a snake. You breed it, its babies, you breed it, its babies, you take those newborn babies and you plop them in the wild. I'm willing to bet you that they have as much chance of survival as any other babies born in the wild. So therefore, one could argue that a reptile born in captivity technically is still wild because it responds to instinct and it behaves more like on a primordial aspect. You know what I mean?
I do.
Where because there's no rearing and the children are not learning from their parents.
Sure.
Therefore, they're born wild and they still behave like a wild animal. Don't get me wrong. In time, you can change that by keeping them in captivity, but depending on the type of animal, I think the terminology wild does apply to reptiles a lot more than I would argue to say, like, let's say more evolved, higher up on the scale there for other animals like mammals.
Yeah, there's a part of that where I would differ a little bit, right? So you ever heard of a potcake dog? You ever heard of these?
No
idea. So a potcake dog is sort of a broad, rough breed description that refers to wild dogs that run around in the Bahamas. These are dogs that they are an amalgamation of a bunch of different dogs that were brought there by people, and they all kind of got out and they became somewhat semi-feral, and they sort of all have like a rough distinction now. They've all kind of homogenized on some level because they all just interbreed. But like there are countless examples in dogs, pigs, chicken, cattle, cats, all kinds of things of highly domestic animals that break free of being on a farm or wherever it is all over the world, and they make it out there just fine. You know, I don't think I think what you're saying is true to an extent. Like if I took a clutch of Uromastyx that hatched here last year and I release those babies into the wild, yeah, you're probably going to get I would bet that there's a higher number of those that would survive than if I took 100 golden retrievers and put them out into the wilderness. You know what I mean? Like, it might only be a couple of golden retrievers that get through, but it might be 4 or 5 of the Euromastics, I don't know. So, I mean, I definitely would meet you there to a point, but I think, at least from all of my, if you look across the globe, there's just, goats, sheep, fish, birds, they just get out and they do their thing, right? Like honeybees, they're not native to the North American continent, but they're here, they're all over, and now we got to save them, right? So there's some element of what we think of as a non-wild or more domestic creature that doesn't fit necessarily with the same. It's not the same thing as like a purely domestic animal. It's not the same thing as what we think of as a wild animal. I think there's a lot more flexibility in what an animal's capable of that has nothing to do with necessarily like how domestic it is, but I think it's probably just not super fleshed out. We don't necessarily know what the rates look like. Like, of course, we know how many pythons escaped into the other Everglades well enough to make them there, right? But how did we get the pigeon, right? It used to be the passenger pigeon that was here in the United States, in North America. It was the passenger pigeon. Now it's the regular damn pigeon, squab. So it's like, I don't know. I don't mean to refute what you're saying. That's not my intent. It's just more back and forth, I guess.
No, I don't. You bring up a good point, and yes, and agreed, like 100% agreed. I just think that the terminology wild would differ from, especially at birth. Like you take an animal that requires parenting, that requires knowledge passed down from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Reptiles don't need that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
I don't know, but anyway.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I'm definitely with you on that. I and I think, obviously it's such a difference between a mammal, like a person or a primate or a dog or a horse. It's just such a different thing on some level than a reptile. I think there's an adaptability and a versatility in reptiles that allows them more success on average. There's probably a greater, maybe not, maybe this is nonsense. So I'll just say that with a caveat that this might not be true, but my guess is that the range of circumstances in which your average lizard could survive, it might be wider than the average circumstance in which a horse could survive, like a greater range of environments. So maybe I could be totally wrong about that. Maybe horses are super adaptable because they live all over the world. Maybe I need to stop. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think everywhere there's grassland, there seems to be wild horses to an extent, right? Not necessarily like everywhere, but it always seems to be a few kind of thing.
Yeah, I retract my previous.
Tend to be a prey source everywhere, so I'm not sure how much would survive too.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. I'll go ahead and retract my previous statement.
I know here in BC, there's probably some. I remember going to the Okanagan and seeing them, and I'm sure they're up more north in some other grasslandy parts of the province as well. But then, like you say, pigs, right?
Yeah,
like,
everywhere.
You take a normal pig and shove it outside. It grows hair and tusks pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it would be so interesting to see what would happen if you took, take like some of the most gnarly bearded dragons that you can imagine, and just take 100 of them as hatchlings and put them in put them on a plot of land somewhere in the outback, just somewhere that's part of their natural habitat. Just leave them there. You know what I mean? You don't have to, just to see. You could fence it in. Maybe it's like really, really, really huge. I would be super curious to see how many made it through and what changes would happen, right? We'd probably get a lot of information because, as you said, this happens with pigs. It happens with cows. It happens with all kinds of animals. When you take the domestic phenotype of that animal and you put them into the wild, as soon as they're subject to all of those wild pressures, well, all of a sudden, all these genes turn on and off, which alter the physical appearance of those animals, right? And we thought that we had selected them out. We didn't really select them out. We just turned them off, you know, and clearly it seems to be ways to turn those things back on. So we might learn a lot about a bearded dragon if one did that particular study, right? You could probably find a lot about what they need and what they don't need based on what changes happen to them both visibly and internally. But I don't think that'll ever happen because it seems unethical on some level.
I feel like all you're describing though is evolution, right? You take that,
Yeah.
and I mean that's essentially happening now. You take
Yeah.
species A and species A just happen to fall on a log, carry over on water,
Totally.
and then two of them, and then all of a sudden these two are now affected by different pressures from the environment. They slowly evolve, they slowly change, they produce offsprings, the ones that look a certain color, you know, and so on and so on. It would be the exact same thing as taking all your weird beardies, fence them off in a 10-kilometer square somewhere different, and then seeing which ones will be adaptable or which ones will have a higher chance. And then in the end, to me, you're just describing evolution and how it
goes. Totally.
I mean, man-made evolution, but still evolution.
Yeah, I mean, but okay, so all right, now we get into some really fun stuff. So I wrote an article recently about how the concept of domestication is not it's something, it's not an inherently human process. This is something we inherited from the arthropods, right? So there are beetles and ants that domesticate that use as domesticates aphids and different kinds of fungi and different kinds of animals that they sort of co-opt and force into artificial constraints that benefit them. Well, turns out it's sort of a feedback loop, like it benefits both of them, right? So the reason I bring this up is because you mentioned this sort of the human influence of selection, the human pressures of selection in breeding and stuff like that. Obviously, this is really important, and it does seem that there's something really forceful about the domesticated phenotype, right? This is Richard Francis. This is his term, the domestic phenotype. It's sort of a general, broad description that gets to the heart of the changes that happen across all species of domesticate animal, right? So you get faster turnaround from birth to breeding capacity, so earlier sexual maturity. You get higher rates of production, both in terms of numbers per litter, but also litters per year. You get really, really definable changes in coloration and visible appearance. There's all, reduced stress response to human beings. I mean, there's all these things that are part and parcel of the domestic phenotype, right? And this is something that we inherited from other animals. And so the idea that it's artificial, I think, is the thing that I would, that's the part where I've been sort of questioning this. It's like, it doesn't really seem artificial to me because, again, in the same way that I would say that, there's no difference between the wild environment and a human environment in a sense, in that we are also natural. Like, humans are animals. We evolved on this planet. We're a natural being, a natural process. And so there's something, I don't want to have a slant on the propagation of animals that says, well, as soon as it's an artificial one, as soon as it's a human choice, well, now it's flawed and it's like a big problem. And I'm not saying that you're saying that, so don't take it that way. But like, this is something that I'm still kind of wrestling with myself. Like, what does that really mean about what we're doing on some level? Like, I don't like thinking about it as an artificial process. I like thinking about it as a deeply natural process that people do for great reasons. Now, obviously, there are some people who do it in shitty ways and for shitty reasons, but that's not unique to domestication by any stretch of the imagination. I think this is sort of, people can do things in a bad way or in a good way, and I don't know. I think about that part. That's something I've been thinking about quite a lot for a few years now, is this idea of like, what's domestication? How is it? What is that process? And sort of why does it happen? And why are people so damn drawn to this thing? Like, why do we all, because all of us, right? All of the people who, like the three of us talking right now, and any of the people that we know that do this work, Like, we love this. There's something really deep and primal about our draw to do this. And, you know, call it my particular worldview. I'm not inclined to think that so many people across so many cultures, across so much time, I'm not inclined to think that we want to do this for bad reasons. I'm inclined to think that we're doing this for good reasons. There's a reason we're doing this. There's a reason that this is something that people want to do, that it's something that we can't let go of, that we can't resist, we can't stop ourselves from doing it. And it's because it's a deeply natural process that people have been doing forever. And in fact, other animals have been doing it forever. You know, so there's some clear benefit that we're getting out of having these animals in our homes with us. And it's our responsibility to make it so that's a two-way positive feedback loop, right? I don't want the work that I'm doing to have a negative effect on the animals. I want it to have a positive one. So as soon as we start getting into that realm where we're talking about the ways that the selective pressures that we put on animals can be negative, okay, well, now we're talking about ethics, right? And so as soon as we're talking about the ethical side of things, well, now this is a choice we can make. And we can say, I'm not going to do this. I'm only going to make choices for these animals, at least to the best of my ability, that result in positive outcomes for me and for them. And I'm not convinced that keeping them wild and keeping them high stress and keeping them freaked out by people and keeping them skittish, keeping them whatever the wild behavior looks like, I don't think that's an ethical way to do it, because you're selecting for an animal that is prone to stress and doesn't want to be here and doesn't want to interact with you. So we should be selecting for animals that love doing this, that are very happy to be working with us, you know? Yeah, I don't know. That was again, a little bit of a tangent, but it's kind of what I do.
I find that interesting, though. So if I was to go on what you're saying, then right now, that would mean that when I would pick my holdbacks, I shouldn't be only picking the ones that are tame and tolerate handling and all that. And I should automatically disregard anything that's bitey and aggressive.
Ah, well, maybe. Okay. Excellent. So, I love this push. Yeah, no, I love this pushback. This is great. So,
because I would never ever choose my animals on that aspect.
Sure.
I just want to put it out
there.
No, I'm looking to hear what you got to say about it.
No. Totally. This is great. I love this. So sometimes, as a breeder, you might have meta information that suggests, like, for example, I have all these Euros, right? And for me, I prefer a Euro that's like a little spicy, you know, that's like got a little bit of, you know, little flex to it. Like when I go to grab it and pick it up, it kind of gives me a little bit of fight. Not to the point where it's freaking out and just doesn't want to get touched. Like, get the hell away from me. That bothers me sometimes. That makes me feel bad, because then it makes me feel like I'm not working with them in a way that makes them happy, right? But part of the problem with the, you know, when we talk about choosing our holdbacks, there's all of the things that we're going to choose and that we're going to select for that are obvious traits, whether it's the paint job, whether it's the personality, whether, you know, whatever. There's all these things that we might select for. But then what's going to happen is there's a whole host of invisible things that you're selecting for that it's not possible for you to account for, because there's genes that you don't know that are at work that you're not aware of, because you know you're not directly tapped into the physiology of that animal. There's traits that you are artificially selecting for by accident that are related to or tied to the other things that you are selecting for. So the prime example of this is the famous, everybody quotes this, it's this famous experiment with foxes done in the Soviet Union by a Russian scientist, where he took a bunch of foxes and selectively bred them for specifically the only selection factor was not having a positive response to people. That's the only thing that they selected for, the single one. But from that one selector, they got all these other downstream effects on the foxes, right? Floppy ears, wagging tails, colorful coats, like piebalding in the coats of the foxes, and all this stuff. And so the takeaway that a lot of people tend to take from that particular study is, oh, we can change anything, even a wild fox. In a few generations, we can make it like a domestic animal. But the real takeaway from that particular study is, Not that we can do that to them, because we already knew that with dogs, but the takeaway was that from one single selection mechanism, friendliness to people or willingness to interact with people, there were all these other tag-along traits that were happening on the gene level that we were not aware of, that just popped up over time as we got more and more friendly foxes. Well, it turns out that all of the things that make a fox more cool with being interacted with a person, that makes them want to whine and wag their tail and come over to you, well, these are also tied to things like coat color and like ears, like whether or not their ears stay floppy, right? It pushes the animals to be more natal, more like more fetal in their development. It kind of arrests they say this about dogs, that most of the breeds we have are actually just arresting the fetal development of dogs at different stages and making that stick to adulthood. And it's sort of an accident. It's an accident of the selection that we're putting on them, right? Great Danes. Great Danes are a great example. So like whales, elephants, giant tortoises, giant lizards, these things all live for super long periods of time in the wild with all of these, the bigger the animal is, the more they just live forever, and they have these really interesting lifestyles, right? Well, but with a Great Dane, it's the same kind of thing. You have this oversized animal, this thing that's gotten really big. But unfortunately, because we are not nature, we're not the same kind of selection mechanism or a selection governing body that nature is, that Mother Nature is. The way we've shaped Great Danes is to make them really, really big. But it just so happens that the things that make Great Danes really big also make them more predisposed to cancer and early death. That's why they have short lives, right? So it's the total opposite of what gigantism looks like in the wild, where you're getting long lives and great health. Just, tortoises don't die of cancer, all this crazy shit, right? They just live a million years out there eating grass. But you get a Great Dane, and same kind of thing. You're selecting for this huge animal, but we're the ones who put that pressure on them. And because there weren't also countervailing forces that pushed them to live longer or to, not overproduce growth hormone in their body, well, now they get cancer all the time. So the all of that to say that, like, we don't really know what we're doing. So even if you think you're choosing holdbacks for specific purposes, we have to be open to the ways that we're changing the animals that are completely outside of our awareness and understanding, right? And so it's not yet possible for us to say, I should pick this one that behaves this particular way, because there's just so many downstream, we just don't have any idea what the downstream results of this are going to be. Look at koi. Koi are bred in the millions every year, right? And that's one of the reasons their development is so rapid. So much stuff happens with koi so quickly because the turnaround's relatively quick and you get huge production. So you get all this crazy shit. And koi have been bred for, selectively by the Japanese for hundreds of years. Same thing with betta fish or goldfish in China. Same thing with various bird types. I mean, there's all these different ways that we've put pressures on them, and we're only just now finding out what some of those pressures kind of mean for them. Look at dogs too. There's all these dog breeds that we have, and we know now that, like, well, if you push a pug too far, they can't breathe on their own and they can't even have natural birth. So maybe we don't push them that far, So I think on some level, a lot of this, the choices that we make, the breeding selection choices that we make are let's see what happens when we do this. And then when we say, oh shit, we made a silkback bearded dragon, well, we got to go back 3 steps. We went a little too far. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like I think of it more, the process of taking holdbacks and choosing what we're going to do for the future is more of an iterative process. One that this is excellent. One that over time we understand more about what we're doing. So that's why it's a feedback loop. It's not just us; it's them too. Like, the animals have way more agency in this than we give them credit for. Thanks for putting up the pugs. That was super cool. Oh, yeah. Pugs are so fucked up.
My buddies were talking about, they're like, have you ever seen a pug skull? Like, they're fucking cool.
Brutal,
like
dude.
The skull itself looks kind of more like like the skull from Alien or something.
Yeah,
almost, right?
Totally.
Except it's not elongated.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think if you take a pug, I think you could Google pug skull versus fetal wolf skull, right? and I'm betting you that there's a comparison between a pug and like a wolf in a particular stage of development. It's got to be, see, that's wild. Look at that. But I bet if you find a wolf in utero, like a wolf skull from like a, wolf that maybe didn't make it to birth or whatever, when they're, I think this is what I might be wrong about this, but my understanding is that so much of the physical outward appearance of these dog breeds, we're actually just pushing them further and further back in their development. Or in other words, we're arresting their physical development at a particular stage so they stay that way for their whole lives. This again, part and parcel of the domestic phenotype, according to Richard Francis. So it's a great book, by the way. It's called Domestication by Richard C. Francis. It's a good one. I've been recommending it to people. You guys should check it out.
So I love this whole ethical. Let's tie this back to what you do. So you're into Euromastic, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So when we go back into domestication or selective breeding or selective pressures, what are the pressures, the breedings, the selectively? And I'm not just talking about colors. I wanted to go deeper than colors. Like
sure.
When you pick your holdbacks, or what is your ultimate goal on either phenotype, behaviors, morphology? What are you looking for to doing towards your four-legged creatures?
Yeah. So it's what it is turning into is I'm trying to get as holistic a picture as I can. So I'm trying to choose animals that cooperate well with others. I'm trying to choose animals that, because Euromastics are super territorial and don't like to hang out together. So I'm trying my best to find ones that play nice and select for those. I'm trying my best to find animals that are not prone to things like obesity or sort of some of the other problems that we might see as a result of captive diets. I'm trying to choose animals that handle breeding very well. I'm trying to choose animals that, when I compare them visually, as best I can, to a wild counterpart, that they stay, in terms of their physique, I want them to look like a wild Euromastics, So I'm trying to keep their physique this way while also push and pull them in other directions. Now, I have, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, with Euros, it's harder to push the selection on the phenotypic side of things, and part of that is because most Euromastics take a long time to develop their full color and their full potential, right? So with something like a bearded dragon or a leopard gecko, they reach maturity so quickly and with so much reliability in terms of that time frame, that it's a lot easier. You could keep an animal for a year and you're going to know, like, okay, it's basically when they look like this as a baby, they're going to look like this as an adult. But with Euromastics, it's really hard to do that because they take 5 years to get to a fully developed adult stage, and the way they look when they're 2 might look really different than the way they look when they're 5. So unless I want to keep all the animals for 5 years to know what they're going to look like, it makes it kind of tough to choose the ones that have, and say, oh, I'm going to be pushing for ones that get crazy blue. Well, I can't know, because just because this one's the most blue at 6 months old doesn't mean that it's going to be the most blue at 6 years old. So some of the phenotypic stuff is a little harder to select for. But again, as long as I'm still trying to choose animals that seem to, again, they do well together, they do well with me, within reason, they seem to breed and live their lives with low stress, at good body weights. As soon as we get that kind of foundation in play, well, then I can start pushing and pulling everything else, whether it's how long their tails, because you get ones with longer tails and ones with slightly shorter tails, right? So can I choose ones with slightly longer tails because I prefer the longer bodied, kind of leaner body type on a Euromastix? Well, maybe I'll select for mostly those. Well, turns out when I select for them, lean ones when they're babies, well, when they're 10, they can get obese really easily. Well, I won't know for 10 years. So a lot of my selection comes down to 2 factors these days. One is diversity. So I'm just looking for as many different looks of Euro and different heritage in terms of, like which of my breeders from 10 years ago produced these animals. I'm trying to get as much of what I started with or more represented in the ongoing generations genetically speaking, but also I'm trying to find animals that are as different from one another as possible. So even though I'm choosing animals that are, I like to choose animals that are super blue or super green or whatever, ones that I'm going to try to push in a better looking direction. I'm also looking for animals that are just very different. If I just keep looking for different ones, well, that's like their visual appearance can be a decent proxy for how different they are genetically. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but it can be a decent one, So that's one way. And the other way is just randomizing it, So I'm not, if I produce 300 euros in a year and I let them grow up until 4 weeks to 8 weeks when they're shippable, well, I'm not choosing my holdbacks right then and there. I'm shipping some animals and hanging on to others. And I take the ones that maybe there's some Thomas, I've got a bunch of Thomasi here, Euromastix Thomasi right now that I've been raising up until a certain point. Well, maybe this one had a lot of potential for the first few months that I had it, but now that it's 6 months old, maybe it's not as interesting anymore. Maybe this one over here is more interesting. So maybe I keep that one and sell the other. So on some level, some of what I keep can be randomized because they're also variable. The axolotl survival project, right? That nunnery down in Mexico that keeps the wild axolotls alive, and all of the sort of organizations and institutions that sort of help with that. I remember reading a little bit about how their holdback process is somewhat randomized because they'll produce, they're an amphibian, so you'll get tons of them produced in a single clutch of eggs. So instead of choosing the ones by the person, saying I'm the guy who's going to choose the axolotls, what they do is they randomize it. So they'll mix a bunch of babies up, or in a big vat, and they'll say, all right, these are all we're going to keep these 100, and they randomly select that 100. And I think that's like a Nash equilibrium thing where you're more likely to get a better set of diversity if you randomize for it than if you try to pick the things that are the right thing. You're more likely to get something that resembles more nature, in that nature knows best, right? You get a clutch of Euromastics, like a clutch of 10 Euromastics that hatch in the wild on Monday. If 8 or 9 of them hatch on Monday and there happens to be a bird right there and eats all of them, and then the 1 or 2 that were a little slower to hatch that people in herpetoculture might have said, oh, that was the runt. He came out a little later and a little smaller. Well, maybe the bird is gone by then, and those babies are the ones that survive and thrive into adulthood. There's a random element to nature. So I think randomizing it along with having your preferences in there is where I tend to be right now. But I wasn't thinking about it like that 15 years ago, and I may not be thinking about it like that 15 years from now. My hope is that in 15, 20 years, I'll have a much more sophisticated answer. But I guess the short answer would be, at the moment, I don't really know. It's hard to make those choices, I think, right now.
So I love your answer, but going back to randomization. So number one, I don't know this, so you can answer this after, but I'm going to assume that you can keep your mastic communally, multiple males and multiple females. No, okay.
Negative.
So because my thought was, how about keeping multiple males, multiple females, and then just letting them do their things, multiple sires to multiple females, and just doing whatever and seeing what comes out, right? Now, if they can't be kept communally like that and males fight, which apparently I don't do 4 legs on.
No, animals, it's okay. So don't worry. No problem.
Everything's legless, so this is new to me.
Yeah.
So that was my thought, to really, obviously, go in for the diversity or for purely randomization, right? Then my next one would be, well, would you just continuously swap males across your females and let everybody give a shot?
This is an awesome question. So let me start with the second end of that first. So I do tend to do that. Usually, I don't. With some exception, let me say it this way: the minority of pairs that I have, let's say 10% of the pairs of Euromastics that I have will pair to each other for many years. Like maybe this one particular pair, I just love the babies that come out of this pair. On average, the babies that come out of this pair just tend to be so bulletproof and so nice and so cool on average. There might be a thing that we're like, I just love that pairing, and I'm going to keep going with that. The rest of what I do, the other 80-90% of all of my stuff, they get rotated all year, every year. It's a different animal to a different animal. So there is an element of that I try to bring to the table. Now, let me go back to the first part about maybe, what could you do to put more of their selection in their hands? So this is super interesting because this is one of the primary differences between dogs and cats in their domestic process is that a very long time ago, people became the primary selector with regard to dogs. We are the primary thing that tells dogs, you're going to mate with that dog. I'm going to make it happen. That's going to be your only opportunity. If you don't make it work, you're not surviving into the future. So that's dogs. With cats, on the other hand, almost all of cat production up until the last 50 to 100 years has been exclusively the domain of the cats themselves. It's been mostly backyard breeding, unspayed and neutered animals doing their thing, and then kittens ending up from those animals. That's one of the reasons that cats are still so similar to the wild ancestor cat from the Middle East. Okay, so I would love to offload most of that decision making to the animals themselves. But now we run into an ethical problem. Okay, so this is where the ethics are going to come back into the picture. With a very communal animal, let's say with gidgee skinks or crag lizards or chuckwallas or Phimoturus, right? Stuff that is naturally group oriented. Okay, these animals, yeah, you could keep multiple males and multiple females together, and you just kind of let whatever forces are at play in those animals choose which ones are going to breed into the future. That's great. But with animals like Uromastyx, they are so vicious and so territorial that would be very, very difficult. Now, there might be a point at which, there might be a cage size and a group structure where if you had like a 40-foot by 40-foot pen with a cliffside in it, okay, well, maybe now you could keep 20 euros in there and they wouldn't all die from fighting, right? Maybe then you could give them a little bit of agency, but sort of within the context that we find them now, it just doesn't seem like that would be the right thing to do. If I keep my animals alone, and when I say alone, I don't mean solitary confinement. I just mean most of the year they're by themselves. But of course they get supervised visits with each other all the time, whether it's breeding season, whether it's off season, just because it's a good thing. It's the right thing to let them interact with one another. It'd be a cruel person not to let them interact with members of their own species and otherwise, because they'd get both of those things in the wild, interactions with members of their own species and members of other species, right? But by keeping them solo, I can better track the health and well-being of each individual animal, and I can be much more speedy with my response to a problem with a single animal. If I'm housing, as soon as I house more than one animal together, all of that goes out the window because it's harder to track who's eating what. It's harder to track who's getting what resources in terms of light, humidity, heat, all of the above. All of that stuff becomes harder to track. And so this is where I would quote the famous economist Thomas Sowell, right? Which is, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And so in herpetoculture, this is absolutely true. There's only trade-offs. And this isn't a net negative. This is fine. This is just the way the world is. So in a world where someone could keep 100 euros outside and just let them propagate on their own at their leisure, epic. I love that. But for the way I'm doing it and for the way I want to see these guys go forward in herpetoculture, they're going to be a little different here. Now maybe there's a guy setting up a bunch of pens in the Arizona desert with with hundreds of ornates. And that's going to be a very different animal in 100 years than my animals are going to be in 100 years, But I also don't think there's one solid right answer to all of this. I think as long as you are operating within reasonable, ethical, humane treatment, there's probably a dozen and a half different looks of what one could do stewarding any species or genus into the future on a herpetocultural level. Does that answer that particular question?
No, it definitely does. I mean, I'll be honest, I had no idea we were going to be doing ethics with Phil today. But
this is
I had a good feeling this is how this was going to go.
I was mentioning to Michael before we went live that like this is kind of the thing. Like part of why I love doing these shows, number one, I get to meet cool people like you guys. That's like the great thing. But I love when I get pushback. Like I love when somebody says, well, oh, hold up, but what about this? I love that because then if I haven't thought of that before, then I get to, mull that over and say, I've never thought about it that way. Like, let me think about it and get back to you. Right. Or it's just a great way of fleshing out ideas. So I have a tendency to steer conversations towards what I want to talk about. So this to me just seems like I fully anticipated getting into this particular can of worms. So I just tend to do this, but I'm also happy to talk about anything else. Like if you want to steer it another direction, like please steer away. It's obviously I'm open-minded.
We tend to just follow the guest. So to me, this works for me.
Sick.
So yeah, Mike, you go. I've been talking more than you, so
it's all good. I wasn't sure how this was gonna go, honestly, because I knew I really wanted to talk about the philosophical parts of herpetoculture as well.
Mhm.
That's kind of why I brought Phil on, because after hearing your first episode back with Ron, it just got those juices flowing.
Oh,
like I would always like listen back to you guys, but then as soon as it's kind of like been a while, and we're listening to other people. Kind of started listening to Adam and Not Another Reptile podcast, along with all the other guys we all kind of listen to as well.
Sure.
But like just hearing that with Ron and just that, I like, because Ron does the systems, and I love him thinking about that. But then obviously he has Heather, who's really good at keeping stuff at a really high quality.
Sure.
And has everything figured out. Like I don't know. I really love that thought-provoking parts of it.
I'm so bummed because the reason that show with Ron ended so abruptly is because we paused the recording to take a bathroom break. And then when we came back, I thought I hit the restart the recording button and I didn't. So the last like 35 minutes of that episode just got completely lost into the ether. And it's a drag because that was that last 35 minutes was like really good. It was really, really interesting. Ron is Ron and Heather both, as well as a number of other people. Like there is a lot of really rich and insightful and profound, I would even go so far as to say is profound thinking going on at the highest levels of herpetoculture. There's people doing really, really incredible work, and it's very cutting edge in the sense that like my view of herpetoculture is that we are very, very young. Like the herpetoculture as an institution, as like a cultural practice is just like a baby, like an absolute little baby, and the way we think about what we're doing now is probably not going to look like the way we're doing it in 100 years. It's going to look really different, I think, especially now with AI and with like just advancing technology, just in general. I think things are going to look super different in not that long a time. But with all that said, it makes the work now a very rich practice of, again, it's a creative process. This is creative and generative because there's no roadmap or step-by-step guidebook for how to do this, whether you have a podcast, whether you're breeding reptiles and selling them, whether you're making products, whether you're making information, whether you're doing all of the above. There's no, here's how you do it. So it's sort of a figure it out as you go along. Well, that makes it really interesting because that gives all of us this really, really rich proving ground of ideas where we can say, all right, we're all going to talk about what we think we ought to do with this stuff going forward. But, all of it's going to, I'm sure that if I'm still talking about herpetoculture in 30 years, I'm sure that I'm going to look back on things that I'm saying now and be like, that fucking guy had no idea what was coming. He just was so uninformed, which is awesome. Like, I think that's great. That's the whole point. I love this kind of stuff. I love thinking about the sort of nitty gritty about why, and specifically, I should say, the areas of herpetoculture that we take for granted. This is kind of the thing that I just love this. Like there's so much herpetoculture that is taken for granted. I think this has been described as folklore husbandry or but it doesn't just, it's not restricted to just husbandry alone. This is everything from, sort of just the way we conceptualize how to do herpetoculture and what it is we're doing in the first place. All of it is very, very new and up to a lot of change and up to a lot of like skepticism and adjustment. But that's a good thing. I think it's a really good thing. I think it's what we should be doing, because it's just brand new. There's a lot of new shit,
Oh, definitely. I
Yeah.
also think that some people forget that that people have been keeping reptiles since like before 1900 kind of
Oh,
thing,
yeah.
almost like the aquarium hobby. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was your guys' show or somebody else's, and they talked about how there was actual like an albino, like they had albino boas. There was an albino boa at like a reptile show in New York in like 1920
Sure.
or like
Yeah.
1910 or something, and
Oh.
it's just insane to hear that this
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
kind of happened back then,
Dude.
even prior to Ditmars and that, right?
Oh, way, way before. I mean, come on. So you can look at, there's cultures all around the world. Like if you look at native cultures everywhere, they all have mythology around the albino buffalo, or there was a white moose that came through the village. Like, we're all gonna die. Who knows? Like, it's crazy. Or just transpose that onto any other culture with a different animal, and there's something about it. There's mythology. There's cultural heritage and cultural meaning there, and even just the keeping, like what one could. Philippe de Vosgely enlightened me. He asked us on the show, he's like, what's the oldest example of herpetoculture that you're aware of? And I was like, I don't really know. And he was like, it was the ancient Egyptians. What they did with Nile crocodiles could be considered a form of herpetoculture. They reared them, they fed them, they sacrificed them, they fed them artificial foods. I mean, all kinds of things, right? So you look at, I mentioned the San Esteban Island iguanas that I have, right? They come from San Esteban Island. It's Tenasserim conspicuosa. Well, there's another island not that far from San Esteban Island where they were introduced by the native people in that area. And it's just a whole other population that they put there so that way they could have food next time they stop by that island. Well, that is a kind of herpetoculture. They cultured San Esteban Island iguanas somewhere else. So it's when I say we're super young, it's true even if we've been doing it for millennia, because we've been keeping dogs for many millennia, we've been keeping cows for many millennia, so maybe it's longer with these other animals, but we've been doing this kind of thing for a long time. Now, maybe the modern instantiation of what herpetoculture looks like is really different. So is factory farming. That looks really different from what we were doing 100 years ago with horses, pigs, sheep, and chickens, and I think a lot of what becomes really fun is to say, all right, well, if herpetoculture is so new and has so much growth in it left, or maturation left in herpetoculture as a practice, well then that tells us that we should probably be looking at these other companion animals and saying, where did we go wrong there? Are there missteps that we can avoid, that we know now with the benefit of hindsight of keeping dogs for 10,000 years? Turns out when you make them look too much like a pug, it kind of fucks everybody up. So maybe we don't select lizards to be like pugs, or whatever it may be. So this is one of the reasons that I find looking at other companion animals is really interesting. I also think that we're probably going to learn a lot from other animals that are domesticate species that we don't recognize as domesticates. So if we look at we wouldn't have much trouble looking at rodents as a domesticate. We say, oh yeah, like the domestic rat, the domestic mouse. Well, we're gonna have to say the same thing for the cricket, for the mealworm, for the superworm, for the waxworm, eventually for the dubia roach, for the isopod, for the we could say that about the tomato hornworm. We can say that about the silkworm. I wrote an article about the cochineal. Have you ever heard of the cochineal? I love telling people about the cochineal. I'm sure Michael knows because I think no. Okay,
sure.
So this is gonna.
Maybe I'll remember.
This is gonna fuck you up. So the cochineal is it's a little tiny parasite, and it parasitizes cactus. Okay, so And the reason this is cool is because what they do is they'll, in all over Central America, they'll culture these cactus, mostly Optunia cactus, right? The pads, the spineless cactus, right? They will weave a box out of agave leaves and inoculate that cactus with that little basket. Inside that basket are little tiny cochineals, which are a little bug, and they parasitize the cactus. And the females, when they breed, their bodies fill with this juice that's like red. It's like bright red. And what we do is we harvest all these female cochineals, we crush them all up, and we turn them into take the O out, take the A out of the it's the did you mean, that's the right one. If you look at the did you mean cochineal, yeah, this is them. So then what they do is they crush up, they dry and desiccate and then crush up these female cochineals, and they become carmine red, which is a dye. Now we're talking about billions and billions of these insects crushed and trafficked all over the globe every single year for dye. And this goes into food and clothing and all kinds of stuff. Well, this has been happening since before Cortez came to Central and South America, right? But then there was a movement to make it so it's not bugs. And so they did the artificial dyes. And if I don't know how old either of you are, but if you're anywhere near my age, you grew up with the red dye problem, like, oh, we don't want artificial food dyes. Well, a lot of that was this artificial dye that took the market away from the cochineal. And so then when we found out those artificial dyes were like harmful to human health, they said, oh, you can't do those anymore. And all of a sudden the cochineal market boomed. So it's this huge thing, right? So that's a domesticate creature. That's clearly a domesticated animal, but we wouldn't think about it in the same way because it's a little fucking bug. It's like a little mite, a little cactus tick, you know? But the reality is our mealworms, our waxworms, these are all, you know, either there already or headed in that same direction, you know? So I don't really remember where I was going with this. I lost my train of thought.
I'd argue that to me, that's not really, it is domestication, but
Sure.
It's not domestication for pet, it's farming.
Mm.
Right? So
yeah,
they're two very different things.
That still makes it domestication, though.
No, you're right.
It does, but it's very different from you domesticate something to keep it as a pet, right? Like you could say that right now the naturalistic keeping with those little tiny bugs, what are they called? Help me out.
Isopods.
Isopods. You could argue that people are starting to keep isopods as pets because they're not necessarily get them to breed them. They do probably because they probably have a lot, but they're starting to keep them as pets because they like looking at them and all that kind of stuff. You could argue that. But in the case where you're talking about, to me, that's purely breeding them to farm them out and to use them, right? And
sure.
No, I was going to lead you down a different path unless you want to keep talking about that.
No, please keep. I don't want to interrupt you. All
right, let me see if I can keep my train of thought going.
Sure.
So my next part would be that I find that the reptile keeping is very different than many other keeping in the other animal. Like you see, absolutely. Like I'll take dogs or cats.
Yeah.
We have a dog, an animal as retarded as retarded is probably not the right words, but in this case it might be as retarded as the pug. We have an English bulldog. We have one, right? Another animal that I got it as a pet, and it's our family dog, and I will never breed it. It's fixed. It's a pet.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I look at my cat. I have a Cornish Rex, another really weird ass cat. And
super cool.
We have one, right? And it's fixed, and it's all that. But the reptile market's very different. Most of the people, we sell our animals, but as pets somewhat, but most animals are sold to as buy A, you can get B, you could produce all these animals. And we almost, the reptile market is almost selling as a propagation, a farming technique, a way to, so why is reptiles more into breeding, but cats, dogs, and all that are more into pets?
Yeah. Excellent. This is a great question. So I think I'll try to answer this in two parts. So the first would be, I think it's pretty clear that there's like multiple forms of domestication, right? Because we might look at our more traditional domesticates like dogs, pigs, sheep, cats, cows, all that good shit. But there's lots of others like plants, right? We have tulips and orchids and lilies and marigolds and just crazy varieties of plants that have been manipulated over millennia by human interference, right? So that's a very different, sometimes that looks like a food production like corn, soy, wheat, et cetera, but sometimes it looks like orchids, tulips, marigolds, stuff where it's got nothing to do with food. We just like the way it looks and we're just going to have it. Most people who maybe, I could be wrong about this, but I wonder how that would break down with tulips. Like how many people who propagate tulips are producing their own varieties of tulips and have more than one kind of tulip. I'd be really curious to know that. So all of that just to say that it may be that we might subdivide what domestication looks like. We might have domestication as an umbrella, but then we might have over here like companionate pet animal. We might have over here like labor animal. We might have over here food animal. We might have over here feeder animal, feeder for our food for our food, right? It could be that all of that falls under one umbrella, and some animals fit in a Venn diagram over all of those categories. They are all of those things. They're pets, they're labor, they're food, they're fun, all of it, right? So to me, all of
fall under the pyramid scheme of just making money, like ball pythons. So
okay, yeah, we could please remind me to come back to that, because I would love to throw my thoughts out there.
I'm sure we can go into the whole that like region of Africa, like they're like their own, it's like its own culture, their own ball pythons, and
definitely.
And I would have to, I think, rebuttaling Dom's comment or question on that is, I would have to say that I think us being in our super niche part of the hobby, we sometimes forget that most reptile keepers are just pet keepers, and they only have less than 5, but we just don't see them because they're not really they're not like a part of the herpetoculture, but they're a part of like the pet. They're just pet owners, right? They're not like, they're just like everyday people that have a bearded dragon, or they have a couple ball pythons, or they have a corn snake, right?
Sure.
Or they have a Herman's tortoise. I feel like there's probably thousands of people. Well, there is thousands
the vast
of
majority
across, right? Like it's the majority of the hobby. We're just a select few that actually like have the disease of herpetoculture. That makes us want to do this.
Yes. So it may be, the conversation around ethics and breeding and what we're doing and whatever, that might pertain to someone who's like a golden retriever breeder, because I have a golden retriever, so it's just easy for me to go on the golden retriever ticket, right? It's like the woman the lady and the gal who bred the golden retriever that I have, she might be more interested in the ethical conversations around what does it look like to steward to play my part and steward golden retrievers into the future. I'm just a link in that chain, and so much of what I would say that most of what I'm thinking about with regard to herpetoculture is an attempt to be a link in the chain, right? A connection from the past to the future. I don't see anything that I do as an endpoint. This is just a part of that continuation into how do we get this going? How do we just keep passing that football forward into the future? Going back to the pyramid scheme part of things with ball pythons is so now listen, let me just caveat this by saying, like, first of all, I like ball pythons. I think they're gorgeous and super cool and weird. Let me also add in there that, like, I totally acknowledge that there's around ball pythons and crested geckos and leopard geckos and some of these bigger, the pillar species of herpetoculture, you might call them. I understand that there is a question and a concern to be raised around their population and whether it's meaningful, whether we need 7 million ball python breeders to see them into the future. I totally recognize that there's a question to be asked there. So I say all of what I'm about to say with an acknowledgement that I'm not trying to discount the negatives that might go on in that particular world, right? But when people say things like, oh, like the ball python or the morph game, it's just a pyramid scheme. It's like, well, it's not, because you could swap out albino or creamsicle or triple decaf frappuccino ball python. You could swap that out for rare, and no one thinks it's a pyramid scheme anymore, right? So as soon as it's not just about the paint job, as soon as you say, well, there's really no difference between a new paint job and a very, very rare snake or very, very rare lizard, no one's going to look at, no one's going to look bat an eyelash at you charging $3,000 each for Borneo earless monitors. But there's no substantive difference between a very rare lizard and a weird looking, like a variant. You know what I mean? Like there's just some variant. I'm not saying it's not a perfect one-to-one, but there's
Phil,
yeah, please tell.
Just to go on that, on the ball python,
Yeah.
there is one rare ball python, which is a locality ball python. The locality ball python that's super long. So why did that one not take off? Why are nobody interested in it? And I would throw that rebuttal on you that there is one specific one that was rare that is very different than the other, and no one gives a shit about it.
Yeah. But that's also true of lots of different pure species of reptiles. No one cares about a green anole. Like no one gives a damn. It's just like, this is a feeder lizard. This is a display lizard. Like they
are freaking cool though.
No, I love them.
I know, but just
really,
to talk like anoles, like there's thousands of species of anoles.
Yeah,
they're all freaking awesome. Like you could even keep a tank of brown anoles, and the males still have the bright red dewlaps, and then the brown anoles, they have all the morphs seem to pop out of them because how their populations work, right? And it's so cool how active they are.
Right. And we have people who, like you said, Dom, I keep snakes. Like I don't keep four-legged stuff, right? So it's like you prefer snakes, I prefer lizards. Like it doesn't matter if something's rare or common. Yeah, the legs, right? It doesn't matter if something's rare or common, mutant or pure locality, whatever that means, right? We can get into an argument about what does a pure species or a pure locality, what does that actually mean? Well, guess what? No one has a solid definition. So it's kind of real, but is it like substantively real? Like it does it matter if it's just something that we construct in our minds? Like not necessarily. I think it's still valid and still viable, but I also think we can have both things. We can have our cake and eat it too, right? I can have a triple decaf Frappuccino inverted butt ball python, and I can have a wild one, and it doesn't matter. Like we can have both of those things. They can coexist together, and it's just all over the place, right? So the idea that it's a pyramid scheme also doesn't fit to me, because I meet people every day, whether it's regardless of whatever reptile they're into, they have their heart set on a particular look. Okay. And it's just a simple supply and demand. If you're the only person in the world with a patternless anerythristic garter snake, if you're the only one with that animal in the world, that is purely an economic factor of supply versus demand. Now, as soon as that one of one becomes one of 1 million, just because there's not the same sort of exorbitant money to be made out of that animal, doesn't mean that animal loses all value. The problem with the true pyramid scheme, like Metabolife or whatever, is that like none of this shit really means anything anyway. Like this product is meaningless and it's pointless, and you can take it, you can not take it. Like who the fuck cares? Right. But the thing that makes it that's what makes it a scheme, is that like you're not actually providing any inherent value by selling Metabolife. But like if you're selling a pet animal, like we all have to get to the point where we're breeding the things that we want to see in the world. And if I happen to be the first person that produces a golden retriever, well, now this is like my proprietary thing. Like I'm the only one with golden retrievers. If you want to get in on a golden retriever and be my competition and sell golden retrievers as well, well, now it makes total sense for me to charge you for that. And it's going to be different than this non-golden retriever over here, because that's not a golden retriever, So, and again, I don't say this to completely negate the problems. Like, again, I mentioned I'm an artist. So like let's talk about the art world, because this is just such a similar overlap. There's this concept of the white cube in the art world, which is the gallery space, the museum space, right? It's a white cube, and this is where we display our work. And if your work goes in that white cube, it's automatically validated as intellectual and sought after and interesting and highfalutin and whatever. But it's completely meaningless on some level, because there's plenty of modern art that it might be really good art, but most people can't do anything with it. It doesn't mean anything to them. That remains true of koi, ball pythons, crested geckos, bearded dragons, and dogs. To someone who doesn't have the time or the whatever to give a shit about what their dog, snake, whatever looks like, well, now it doesn't really matter. But if I've got the time to care, and I've got the time to say, like, you know, I really like these snakes, but I'd love one that was just yellow and white. Oh, it's got red eyes too? Fuck yeah, give me that albino. You know, like, send it over here. Like, that has a different kind of value. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it should be something that everyone should be able to extort everyone else for around that value, but it doesn't take away. I think that sometimes people, there's an element in any particular industry where the imbalance of economics can lead people to think that there's an inherent fault or an inherent problem with a particular way of doing things, which is like, okay, you know, fair enough. Like, if I found out that the, you know, the morphing, the exorbitant cost, all of that is independent of the life that those snakes are living and the ethics behind what you're doing. So as long as the ethics behind what you're doing and the life your animals are living is one of good value, and you're providing good value to the people who buy those animals, like a viable, healthy, dependable pet that both people can benefit from, well, now it doesn't really matter to me if it's $5 or 5 million, right? Is there any real substantive difference between a horse that can win the Kentucky Derby and a horse that can pull my plow in the field? Not really, like a little bit, but that added value is put in by people who see the value there. You know, so someone once said to me years ago, your animals are worth whatever someone is willing to pay for them. So if someone comes to me and says, you know, I don't really like your albino Eurymastix J. It's like, that's fine. You don't have to buy it. You know, it's like, it's you don't want to spend 15 grand on it. Okay, that's fine. You won't have one. You know, and when they come down in price and when they're more accessible to the average person, great. They should be. You know, I don't want every ball python that's some brand new 5 combo morph to be $10 million. But if it's the only one and if it's the first of its kind, that's just like a literal supply and demand equation. It doesn't seem the same to me as, anyway. Yeah, I'll stop.
No, it's okay. So I kind of like where you're going, but I'm going to throw something else at you. So
hit me
again. I've had ball pythons, a total of 2 in the 90s, and I actually really like them.
Yeah.
But here's my issue. There's 100,000 ball python probably produced in North America every year.
There's more than that.
I don't even know, like a ridiculous number. Like
probably a 250,000.
Where do they all go? Right?
Yeah.
The amount that must be dying, the amount that's not making it. Like there's such a ridiculous number that the ethics behind should you breed a ball python right now, to me, is mind-blowing. Because the way I work is I produce anywhere between 10 to 15 clutches a year. Mm-hmm. And then right now I produced 12 clutches last year, and I have 5 babies left for sale.
I love where this is going. I love this.
To me, if I have 5 babies left going and I haven't even paired anything yet, and I'm not producing anything for another 5 or 6 months, mm-hmm. ethically, I don't think I did anything wrong. I don't think I'm overproducing. Mm-hmm. And to me, there's nothing wrong with repairing and redoing it. Now, in the ball python world, and again, we could pick other animal, like I don't know what else animals that it's overproduced. You could say
crested gecko.
Sure. Gecko. Just to not only pick at ball pythons here, mm-hmm. but mm-hmm. should you keep breeding your ball pythons? Like, right. And
right. Okay.
To me, the answer is flat out no.
Right. This is awesome. Yeah, this is a great question.
I would also be like, I'd almost be less worried about the ball pythons, because theoretically you can keep them more ethically, even in a smaller setup, than say the retics. Like, I think that's the atrocity, is whatever the retic hobby is.
Yeah,
just you can, but the numbers.
I don't even think there's any breeders keeping adults properly, let alone doing it properly.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. I love this question. So the first thing that pops to mind is to say that the real beef for me actually has a lot more to do with the fact that ball pythons are still harvested from the wild. That's the part that's like, this is not the only reason we're still pulling ball pythons from the wild is so we can keep finding weird ones that we can sell for an exorbitant amount of money. That part, that's like, I get why that's happening, but maybe it's not, maybe we shouldn't have that, right? But so some of this has to do with maturity and maturation, right? So any market is going to go through inflations and bubbles and then kind of pops, and then they mature. The market realigns with reality. Okay. So it may be that ball pythons went through multiple bubbles where there were way too many people getting in and it was an unsustainable market. Well, there's going to be a correction there, right? If you look at it from an economics perspective, there's going to be a correction. Everybody I speak to says the ball python market is down right now. Well, guess who's going to be the first swath of people to get out of ball pythons? The people who are not committed to them. Okay, so you're going to see all those people sort of vacate, right? And yeah, I'm with you on the topic of, if there are so many, why keep producing them? Yeah, that's a totally fair. That's true. I'm right there with you. I'm absolutely on board with that. But we also have to balance this against the reality that if we wish to have a sufficient number of founding, what we might in the future call founding members to a given population 1,000 years from now, that would require the most amount of people now producing ball pythons for the future, because then we have the most amount of diversity and the most likelihood that ball pythons will make it to that 1,000 year from now mark. Because if what happens now, if we say that the ball python market now is just a bubble just popped and it's in free fall and it's so hard to move ball pythons and whatever, well, what happens if everyone all of a sudden decides tomorrow that ball pythons are not the viable thing forward and everybody starts getting out of them? Well, in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we're going to say, you know what I haven't seen at this expo in a while is like a ball python, because this is true of almost any herp in herpetoculture. I can't tell you how many messages I get from people who say, I can't believe you would want $500 for a baby ornate Uromastyx. I used to buy them at expos for $75 a piece. Well, they're not around anymore. Like, I mean, they're just literally not here. No one decided to take those $75 euros, raise them to adulthood, and produce them and propagate them into the future, right? So there's a tension between when we reach like a saturation and overpopulation and when we reach too low numbers to see that project forward into the future. So all of these markets are seeking to find a middle ground, a balance between those things. And my guess is that with ball pythons, it's just going through multiple corrections, right? Now, it doesn't answer the question at the end of the day. It doesn't answer, what do we do with all these ball pythons that are around that nobody wants? That's a completely different question that absolutely has to be addressed. I have no idea what that looks like. I really don't. I'm not an expert in that kind of thing. I have no clue what that would look like. I'm completely open-minded to what it would look like to see that going forward. But the same argument is made with dogs and cats. There are plenty of dogs and cats. Why don't you just adopt them? Why don't you just go to the rescue and get your dog or your cat from a shelter? It's like, well, okay, unfortunately, a lot of the dogs and cats at shelters have all these problems, have things that make them disqualifying as pets, or make them not the right thing for me, my family, my kid, my life circumstance. And so that's why we see such a big rise in quality reptile and amphibian rescues, is because there's going to be an entire avenue of people who desire nothing more than to rescue a ball python that just not wanted,
Yeah, but see, I'd argue that the cat and the dog is different though, because if you're going to get out of the rescue, they're all spayed and neutered. Now, if I have 100 ball pythons right now, and I tell myself, is it that ethical for me to breed my 100 ball pythons right now? Let's say I'm a ball python breeder. Sure. In my opinion, it's questionable, right? Because all those babies that I'm popping out, I'm not spaying and neutering them all and giving them as pets.
Yeah.
All those babies are being sent out as potential breeder and in the ball python community, you're breeding ball pythons to make mole ball pythons to hit those genes or those colors, etc., etc.
Sure.
So to me, it doesn't compare to a cat and a dog that is spayed or neutered in a shelter, or spayed and neutered when I breed it, because you got to pay way more if you don't want it as a pet. To me, it's a completely different thing, and the ethics behind the ball python breeding when there is a gross over population, overproduction of them. So to me, I think it's wrong. If I had 100 ball pythons, maybe you pair 1 or 2. I would say leave the 98 others not together.
Okay, so that part I won't argue with at all. I actually have a good friend named Josh Markey who's a ball python breeder, and he mentioned recently to me in a conversation, he's like, I might not breed any of my ball pythons next year. That sounds like the right answer, you know? Like, and Josh has been doing it for a long time, and he's probably going to keep breeding ball pythons for a very long time into the future. So that's great. So I have no qualm with what you're saying at all.
I think that's what I've heard from a bunch of ball python guys. Not that they were going to get out of the hobby, but like they still have their babies from last year or even the year before. They might
just sit on them.
Why even worry about it, right? Like, just sell what you got, and then maybe pair 1 or 2 that you really want, kind of thing.
Well, so then this part of the conversation would be where I would steer us back to what I was talking about before, which is this is exactly the kind of situation where we might look at similar domesticate animal markets that are pre-existing and say, what do we need to learn from those to not do that in the future, right? We probably shouldn't do this ball python thing in the future. Or or in the same way, right? What can our existing ball python breeders learn from dogs, cats, guinea pigs, ferrets, chickens, right? So this is a great opportunity for them to learn. But also, let me just say one last thing about that too, which is that I agree with you about the spay and neuter thing. I think it might be kind of cool if we adopted the idea of like when we got our cats, my wife and I have Bengal cats, and when we got them from the breeder, there was 2 prices. There was the spayed and neuter price, and then there was the unaltered price, right? So that means that if you wanted to breed that animal, well, now you've got to pay a little bit extra to make sure that it's not spayed or neutered. Oh, did I lose you guys? Oh, okay.
Oh no, you're all good. You just
good.
Out of the screen.
We could still hear you, no problem. No idea.
Okay, good. That you guys froze. So I just wanted to make sure everything was cool. So
all good. Keep going.
So I would love to see some breeders adopt that pricing structure. Like, I'm going to fix this animal unless you want to breed it. If you want to breed it, you're going to pay me more money. Like, that's totally fine. But that also might feed into the pyramid scheme side of things, right? Because if you want to buy it, if you want to breed them and make money, you got to pay me money, right? So then now that starts to sound kind of funny. But the other thing is, we know now with dogs and cats that the ethical thing for so many years. I remember who was it? Bob Barker at the end, like, don't forget, spay and neuter your pets, right? Like, this is the thing. This is the ethical thing to do. Spay and neuter your pets. Well, turns out, just like we all know, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Turns out when you spay and neuter dogs and cats at young ages, well, guess what? They as soon as they hit their middle age, they start getting way more problems. Dogs and cats that were spayed real early, before they get to go through a heat cycle or 2, they get higher rates of cancer, higher rates of other major health problems because of the hormonal things that don't occur because they were not allowed to go through normal sexual maturity, right? So whether it's cancer rates in dogs that are spayed early, or cancer rates in cats that are spayed early or neuter early, like, this is a whole nother problem. So it's like, if we're going to say we're going to spay and neuter them, so that way there are fewer of them in the future, well, then we're going to acknowledge that also the ones that were spayed and neutered are going to have these health issues that are going to cause problems for me and for them. It's not good for them either. So it doesn't. I understand. I recognize that I'm not proposing a solution here. Right. And that's because, I'm not necessarily always the solution person. I think for me, it's easier to find the problems. Like, it's just sort of the way my brain works, right? Like, the way I find out what is true Like, if I can find a way to call this bullshit, well, then maybe that's not quite right. But if this particular argument I have a hard time calling bullshit on, like, well, maybe that's going to be the argument that I hold for the time being. So I recognize that what I'm saying right now isn't necessarily like well, here's how you fix all of this stuff. Like, I really don't know. Like, I don't know how we deal with overpopulation. I don't know how we deal with what happens when you have market maturity that happens in an animal, and now we're dealing with thousands and thousands of animals that might be suffering. Okay, well, that's a big problem. But all of this pales in comparison to the fact that we have a lab and feeder rodent industry that upholds the ball python industry that is just horrific. Like, rats and mice are brilliant, feeling, interesting creatures. And the idea that we would outsource their life, just like we do with cows and pigs and all this stuff, we outsource their life to support this other thing that we're doing, that is a horrific ethical crime that also deserves a lot of attention. Again, no idea what the solution is there. But there was that recently Arcadia put out, sort of like Reptilinks, they put out another food. They call it the Evo RX, and it's like this food that's, supposed to be like this meal replacement, and it's made mostly out of chicken, and it's vet certified. And we figured this out with reptile nutritionists and zookeepers, and it's this thing, and look, that's another example of there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. That's a great idea. It's great to have this thing that might reduce our reliance on feeder rodents, which is like a horrific thing, right? But when in the history of fucking anywhere ever has the processed alternative been better than the real thing? Never. That's the fucking answer. Never. So do I think it's bad to the way that I see a lot of people, a lot of these major companies like breeding and mass killing all these rodents? Yeah, it's a big problem. If I kept a snake, would I feed it Reptilinks or Evo RX? Hell no. Like, no way. I'm not going to do it. But that's because it's a very difficult solution. So you mentioned earlier that you described yourself as let's call it a small batch artisanal breeder, right? That's what I think of myself as, is like a small batch artisanal breeder. I produce somewhere in the range of 175 to 300 lizards every year. And that's enough for me, and it's great, and it's fun, and I love it. That is, there needs to be enough people doing this kind of work, not just to sate the market, but to ensure that in 300 years, there's somebody with euros. And I think we in herpetoculture are still trying to figure out where that balance falls. In fact, I would argue that the horse market is also still trying to figure out where this falls, because we all know that horses are also victims of animal cruelty too, right? And yet, so there's a great Freakonomics radio podcast. It's a 3-part series right now that they have out that's about the economics of the horse breeding industry. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I recommend everyone go listen to this, because 100 years ago in the United States, everybody owned a horse. You had to have a horse, right? Whether it had to do with your fields, or whether it's just, I have to go into town and buy food. I'm going to get on a goddamn horse and I'm going to ride it there and I'm going to bring food back, right? So there was a market for horses at one point in the United States where everyone needed them. And so you're going to have a big infrastructure and a big demand for horses. Well, now all of that's changed. You don't have as many people who are using horses for labor or transportation. The majority of horses are being used for dressage or for horse racing or for show horses, right? Well, so now we have the exact same problem as we do in herpetoculture. How do we make sure that we don't have too many horses? I don't know. Like I'm not really sure what that looks like. I think it's challenging.
I'm going to throw it to you. I think you've just named. So with horses, what happens to unwanted horses? They become food, right? So they're used as food. So now I would argue that with ball pythons, and this is where we'll feed off a rat for food and keep rats as pets, and rats as pets are incredible pets.
They're so cool.
So now, if you were to say a ball python, why is it that if I tell you I'm going to breed my ball python, I've had 100 babies, I'm going to keep these 7 select ones because they hit what I wanted? Mm-hmm. And what if I call all the others and sell them off as food for
king cobras.
Ophidius. There you go. Thank you. So, but when you talk about that, a lot of people get really upset with you, right? Like it's the same idea as like hybridizing species to hit the one-off animal that'll hit the genes you want, and that will be your hybrid species. Well, in my opinion, everything else should be called, because then you've got these animals that are just garbage mutts that will then be sold off and then misrepresented and create more junk in the reptile industry, right? In my opinion, we should allow culling and should see culling as a, to me, ethical culling should be part of the solution. And in the ball python industry, it should be acceptable to cull 90% of your unwanteds or of your less desirables for food. And I don't know. I'll throw it to you. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay.
Am I wrong to think like that? And I don't do it, but I do think
no.
And I do call some animals.
Yeah.
Usually the ones that have deformities or issues, right?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So this is a super good question. So this is similar. Koi do this. They do this with koi too. So one of the gnarly aspects of the koi world is that if you watch this, there's this epic content creator named the Koi Partner on YouTube, and he makes these brilliant documentaries. He's this Dutch fella who makes these brilliant documentaries of he goes to Japan, to Niigata during the koi harvest season, and he watches the koi where they drag them out of the mud ponds and they put them in the spawning tanks, and then they harvest the eggs and the sperm from the koi, and then they mix it together, and then they take all the spawn, and when the little fish come out, they sort through them with like this little sorting net, and they pick them one by one, and they pick all the koi that they're going to keep for the next year, and then all the rest are either sold in batches of like lower quality koi to distributors, and then a certain amount of them are cold and they're just ground up. And I don't know this for sure because the Koi Partner never talks about it, but I'm pretty sure that they get fed right back to the koi, which is sort of incestuous in a way and sort of fucked up, right? So, this is a very, very good question. I don't know the answer. I really don't know. I think it's difficult because I'm not sure if I would prefer to see a large number, let's say 80% of the ball pythons produced yearly in the United States. I don't know if I'd prefer to see them cold. Now, if I knew that they were being cold and that resource was being diverted into something useful or something valuable, I might be more open-minded to it. But I struggle with that one. I'm not sure. I think any breeder probably has culled an animal at least once in their career, for various reasons, whether it hatched deformed or something was super, super wrong, whatever it is. I think we've all had to make that decision before. But I think making that decision with an otherwise healthy animal that just simply doesn't fit the standard that I put forth for it, I'm not sure I can get behind that. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, outright. But there is something icky about it in my mind, because I look at that animal and like some of those animals, and I think, well, it's just like feeder rodents. I used to work in a pet shop, and the whole back of the pet shop was racks and racks of rats and mice. Damn, they were all super cool. Like every one of those rats was like nice and friendly and had a lot of feelings, like a super cute little pet. Like it didn't make a difference to me whether or not it was the perfect feeder or had a tumor growing out of the side of its ribs. It was still like a cool animal. So I'm not sure. That's a really good question, man. I don't know what the answer is for that one. You got me on that. I don't know.
I bet you I could even bring it closer to home for you. So you
keep
Uromastyx, right? You've got different species?
I do.
Okay, so is there a mutation in one of the species that's pretty cool?
There are.
Name me one.
Lavender albino J-Rye.
Okay, so that was really long. Let's just go with...
Just call it albino Uromastyx. Okay. Just call it albino Uromastyx.
Okay, and what species is that one in?
Uromastyx J-Rye.
Okay, so what if I want to put that into ornates? You breed
Sure.
that one to your ornates. You produce a hornet
Yeah.
cross, which would be a hybrid that is het
Yeah.
for albino, right? And
Yeah,
then now you've got all these hybrid mutts, and then you breed your hybrid mutts to each other, and you finally produce your first albino ornate that is really, you know,
A
50% hybrid.
Sure.
Now, what do you do with all the non-albino ones?
Yeah.
What do you do with that? Would you call them? Because you wanted to put albino into your ornates, and then let's say then you bring that ornate albino back to a normal ornate, and then you produce 75%. What do you do with those offsprings, and so on and so on? So this is your project now. This is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Do you call everything else, or do you throw out those 75% into the breeding population, into the wild herpetoculture? Right. So this is where I want you to answer that. How would you navigate that? Because I feel like all that shit should be called. But that's me, right? And ethically, is it right?
Yeah.
But what would you do?
No. It's fair. So this is a great topic. Okay. So I'm gonna try my best to answer this as succinctly as I can, but of course I'm long-winded, so bear with me. My thinking is multifaceted. I have a very open mind to what hybridization means, what the future of herpetoculture looks like. I am convinced that we can have it both ways. I can have pure ornate uromastyx, and I can have mutant ornate uromastyx if I want. I think that there are real challenges with maintaining what would be ill-defined as species purity into the future across multiple generations. I think that the reality is that none of these animals are ever going back into the wild, and therefore bear no responsibility in representing their wild genes into the future. Now, with that said, I'm not hybridizing my uromastyx, and at least not right now. I won't preclude the possibility that I might do it in 10 years. I don't know yet. My mind changes all the time. So I don't know. I would be hesitant to cull those mutts because just because they have served a particular end in my care doesn't mean that that is the end of their utility as either a pet or a breeder. And anytime you venture into the waters of hybridization, you have no idea where that is going to take you. Hybrids, for those people that don't know, hybrids are deeply variable and have lots and lots and lots of uncertainty, both visually and genetically. And it would be unwise of me, even if I was seeking a four-way hybrid between uromastic species, it would be unwise of me to take the two-way hybrids and discount them and send them out of the collection before the project was seen to fruition. Because it may be that when I go four-way rather than two-way hybrid, that they're not viable. Maybe they can't reproduce. Maybe they're mules at that point. Maybe the two-way hybrid is as far as I can go. Maybe the two-way hybrid looks better than the four-way hybrid, right? I mean, and by looks better, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just a mix of the traits that I would want to see if I was going to fuse two species together, right? I think that the idea, and again, I say all of this with a reminder that I'm not hybridizing anything. I have no beef with hybrids, though. I think that they are totally viable. I think that hybrids of any species have a place in the future of herpetoculture. I think the idea that species are a man-made construct that no biologist can find consensus on. There is no mutually, universally agreed upon definition of a species. These are lines we draw in the sand, and they are subject to change all the time. Just because I have ornates that exist from 10 different import groups, which some came from Jordan, some came from Israel, some came from Egypt, some came from Saudi Arabia. Those genetics haven't seen each other for millennia. And the idea that sometime in the not so distant future, they might not be subdivided into subspecies is completely up to the whims of a biologist in a university in Tel Aviv and not the purview of the animals themselves. Evolution cares what it can put forward into the future, not whether or not it can put forward an ornate uromastyx into the future. Okay, so again, this is my very optimistic perspective in herpetoculture, which is that I want to draw a bigger circle. I want more people included in herpetoculture. I want the people who are hybridizing 6-10-way species. I also want the people who are producing pure locality, pure whatever, like, because what does that mean? First of all, there's no definition of pure locality. This is all subject to people's interpretation, right? This is all an interpretive dance. So is speciation. This is an interpretive dance. Now, that doesn't mean it's not valuable, and it doesn't mean there shouldn't be people. Like, I want to see a pure diamond python forever into the future. But we also have lots and lots of examples of hybrids already that pre-exist in herpetoculture. Galapagos tortoises, Cyclura iguanas, right? Bearded dragons, leopard geckos. They're all an amalgamation of many, many since categorized species and subspecies. And yet we have them here, right? So go ahead.
But my issue with that is that choosing to do those hybrids can remove the choice of everybody for the future.
Sure.
Right. And choosing to do a pure or choosing to do a locality breeding does not remove the choice of the person in the future. So right now, if I told you try to breed pure, I don't know, let's go with pure bearded dragons, try to breed pure reticulated pythons, right?
Yeah.
All of these right now, it's getting harder and harder to do, and I think it's actually impossible for bearded dragons.
It's impossible for bearded dragons. Well, almost. You could get Barbata.
You get what I mean. So because because certain people chose to do that, you remove the choice of the future herpetoculturists.
No,
right?
Well, but this is the part where I disagree. We don't remove that choice because, as I said, we can have our cake and eat it too. There are people who are wholly dedicated. Like, for example, a very good friend of mine, Camille Hammers in the Netherlands. This is Hammerhead Reptiles. He's another Uromastyx keeper and breeder like me. He is horrified by the idea of hybridization. That gentleman, just like me, he will go to his grave never hybridizing Euros. I mean, maybe, who knows, maybe Cam has changed his mind. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Cam, I love you. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. I want to hear it, right? Cam is probably never going to do that. So as long as Cam is alive and working, there's going to be pure whatever he's working with, right? And just because maybe not me in particular, but just because I chose to hybridize Uromastyx doesn't eliminate the possibility for someone in the future. Let's say we had an entire generation of every single bearded dragon breeder dedicating themselves to only breeding pure Pagona viticeps, pure bearded dragons. Let's pretend that this was in the cards, right? As soon as you start to expand your time horizons, that becomes harder and harder and harder and harder to do. Okay, so the only way to ensure that going forward is to allow for both possibilities to exist. Because as soon as you say we're only going to do pure, and if you do hybrids, you are excommunicated. Well, now what you've done is you've allowed for the secrecy. You've allowed for the idea that, I can breed, because like the Cyclura iguanas. You have the Grand Cayman Blues, which were hybridized with, I think, the Cuban rock iguana, maybe. And so these are a hybrid. And the whole reason we have them is because now people say, well, I can traffic this animal across state lines because it's not a pure Cyclura lewisi. It's a lewisi hybrid. But we all know that if you continue to propagate those lewisi hybrids and you keep selecting for ones that look like pure blues and you keep going and going and going and going, at some point it becomes almost genetically and visually indistinguishable from the other. Now there's
been people that have been good. I think they did genetic research, and some people might have got their PP slapped because they had pure, like they genetically tested as 100% pure lewisi in their collections.
That may be the case.
I believe I've heard that, and that's also why Galapagos are allowed to go across state lines too. I didn't realize that
the Galap tortoises.
up here, some of our laws are like, even if it's a hybrid, it's still illegal.
Yeah, yeah. But in the States, it's a loophole, so you can get through. That's why a lot of these guys can move these Galapagos tortoises all over the place, even though they're an endangered species, because they're all hybrids, right? So like that's fine. But my point is that it's sort of like the drug market. If you make weed, coke, and all this other shit illegal, well, you don't eliminate coke or weed or whatever. You just send it underground, and people are going to do it kind of underground. But if we have it out in the open, where we have stud books and organization and genetic testing that says all of this animal, these are all ornate uromastics, and it's unbastardized. And the second we find anything that's not ornate, all those animals are out. They're no longer a part of that group. You can only have that when you allow an adjacent lane for the non-pure, for the hybrid, for the whatever. And this is all in an effort to serve the most number of future people in herpetoculture down the line. So I want to make sure that in 150 years, anybody who gets into Euros can choose between an ornate and a fancy uromastics, some triple inverted Hetfer ball python uromastics, so right?
I love your positive outlook, and it's beautiful. The problem is the people that think like you are far few and
for now,
but they still are, right? Because the problem is for every person that does that, there's hundreds and hundreds of people that bought Uromastic from Pet Shop A and other Uromastic from Pet Shop B and put them together and produced tons of babies continuously and pushed out. And the waters keep getting muddied and muddied and muddied. And eventually, yes, you'll still have a few that produce pure. And I'm going to bring it back to Retix, because Retix is exactly that. The Retix market has been so muddied that every species of Retix have been mixed in together. They're all partially dwarfs to a certain degree and all that. And even though there still are pure Retix, and there are pure Retix of each species, there are so few that is it sustainable? It probably is, because there's a few people that will go like you, that will go through hell to make sure that they have their specific species and that they're as pure as they can possibly be. But again, it's as pure as they think they can be, because the waters have been so muddied that there's always going to be a certain amount of question marks that eventually you're just you're just
this is awesome. This is so good. I have three. Sorry, Michael. I got a 3-point rebuttal. So the first is, I don't know any bearded dragon keeper who's sitting here having woes over whether or not they have a pure Viticeps, or whether or not that Viticeps has a tiny bit of Henry Lawsoni or a tiny bit of Barbata. I don't think any of them give a goddamn, right? And if they do, it's a foregone conclusion. There's nothing you can do about it. Second part of this is going to be, just because it is the case now, like, I don't want to make the mistake of thinking that the future is going to look exactly like the present. So it is from my view, we need people who are taking a positive frame on every facet of herpetoculture that falls within ethical lines, to steward that into the future with dignity and responsibility. And then the third final prong of that is going to be, this is where the argument around importation, legal, sustainable, small batch importation, can solve that problem. If we preserve wild places and we allow these animals to be commercialized and conserved by way of commercialization, well, then we always have access, in theory, to the pure animal, which we could have a whole different conversation about what pure means and what pure species means and what locality means and whether or not that's ethical, whether it matters long term. That's a whole different conversation. And then the final part of that third prong is going to be technology, right? So this is a little far-fetched. Now we're getting into the realm of speculation and sort of fantastical thinking. But like, the moment we have democratized genetic manipulation technology, well, now it doesn't matter anymore if everyone's hybridizing their Fiji iguanas, because I can always have a data bank of pure Fiji iguana genetics to pull from if we have, again, given sufficient genetic technological advancement and manipulation. Well, now I've talked about this in the context of smuggling, right? So when we're looking for, instead of looking for a bunch of lizards and snakes in a suitcase, now we're looking for flash drives with genetic information. Well, if we open source all of that genetic information and we have democratized CRISPR where you and I can download the DNA sequence for a Fiji crested iguana, and I can download it and I can put it into a 3D printer with a little bit of organic juice in there, and all of a sudden we get a Fiji iguana. Well, now all of this hybridization and species diversification and founding population is all moot. It all disappears because we now have that tech that flattens that problem, and it's no longer a hill to climb, it's a choice to make.
But then you're going to cause Jurassic Park, and that's another story altogether.
But I love Jurassic Park, and we should all we should do it. Let's make it. Let's make the park right now. This is great. I love this. These are great questions, and these are so interesting, and I love it because, again, I'm not, and let me just reiterate the fact that my goal is to my goal, my general thrust is to expand that circle. So I want everyone in the future, I want to be able to go to fast forward 200 or 300 years into the future and to be able to purchase a pure wild type, which we could talk about that, pure wild type ball python, Antaresia, croc monitor, retic. Like, I want that in the future. I also want in the future some guy who produces some crazy fusion between a retic, a berm, a ball python, and an anthill python all in the same animal, and it's some random weird nerd loves it. I get it. It's not for everyone, but you give a thumbs down to it, but there are people who give thumbs down to Chinese water dragons as a whole. They say, why would we ever import those? Like, those things are so stupid and they don't do well, and like, why would we ever have those? And to me, there's no discernible distinction between whether we're talking about a pure species that people don't value and whether or not we're talking about a hybrid or some kind of mutant that people don't choose not to value or whatever. And I'm not saying you, Dominic, as a person should keep hybrids or whatever it is, and it sounds like you probably never will, and that's great. You should be around. You should be involved.
You keep some carpets, or did.
Okay,
those
so
albino exantic
whoa.
granite.
The only thing I have is an albino granite, and in my defense, technically speaking, an albino granite is pure because they are both the same species. They're both variegata. One is they're different localities, but genetically speaking, they are identical. So therefore, they are not a hybrid.
Okay, I have a question for you, Dominic.
They've been split up for 3,000 years, though.
Why does it matter? Okay, so why does it change? So, for example, I'm sure this is the case with all kinds of different stuff that you work with too, but with Uromastyx, there's a bunch of species that naturally integrate. So they naturally overlap in the wild. So you could have a Moroccan there's banded and Moroccan Uromastyx that overlap. There's ornate and Philbii Euros that overlap. There's Sara species that overlap. There's all these animals that overlap and naturally integrate. Why is it substantively different that if they naturally integrate as opposed to if they artificially integrate? Like, why is that substantively different?
Because a cross and an integrate is not the same thing at all. So,
I understand that a hybrid and an integrate are totally different, but what I'm saying is, why does that distinction exist? Because if I need to hear why that distinction matters, because let me take this. Let me just go.
Damn you, Lisa. Damn
let me
you.
Let me just go one. Let me just take this a little bit further. Okay, so when did a Fiji iguana become endemic to Fiji? And when did it become distinct from the green iguana that landed there? When did it become distinct? And who makes that decision? Why does it matter whether, again, if we're going to argue that human beings are a natural evolutionary product of nature, right? We are a product of the world. Just because I moved this one animal to an island it's not any different than if a floating set of branches moved this iguana to an island over here, and now we have a hybrid. This is a completely arbitrary distinction.
Okay. So evolution to me works if you exclude humans out of that equation. Once you put humans in it, we can agree that humans do not live in balance with nature anymore.
I disagree.
Humans are. You disagree.
I do.
Okay, have you ever? Do you remember watching The Matrix? I'm sure you've watched Matrix.
Yeah.
You know the best freaking line in The Matrix is when he describes what a human is, and he describes a human as a species that goes, you ruined it. It says the species goes to one area, consumes all resources, depletes it completely, then has nothing left to consume. What does it do? It spreads, then it consumes, it spreads, it consumes. And that is literally what we do as a species. We don't live in balance with the environment. We simply keep propagating. Now, will the earth eventually balance itself out? And it seems like it's actually kind of doing that. So at one point, yes, we would. But in order for us to balance ourselves with the earth, we have needed to kill a ridiculous amount of species, and we are considered the era of the fifth extinction of species in the world, right? So we can agree that maybe, yes, we will come to a balance at some point, but we have taken a toll on the species diversification because of it.
So in the same way that we have inherited domestication from other creatures that also do something that is a lot like domestication, we also have inherited this idea of being out of balance from the way the natural world goes from other creatures. There was a time frame in the history of the planet Earth where plankton were basically the only extractive organic mechanism on Earth. Plankton changed the atmosphere of the planet to be full of oxygen so that way other animals could flourish in the future. This is just an absolute accident. And there was a huge spike in the population of plankton on the planet, and it reached a peak sufficient to where it changed the atmosphere and changed the weather patterns and changed the organic makeup of the planet Earth. And then guess what happened? Huge collapse, big extinction, a bunch of plankton went away. And then what happened? We had a new set of chemical circumstances on the planet when everything decided to, and then all of a sudden, all of the evolutionary forces. So there's this idea, it's called niche construction theory. Okay, so this is from evolutionary biology. And the concept of niche construction theory suggests that the traditional evolutions looks at selection pressure as something that just happens to animals. Okay, so we are an organic animal that lives in the environment, and we are subject to pressures, selective pressures from that environment. But niche construction theory looks at the environment as a constant back and forth between the environment itself and the animals that live in it. Okay, the environment is not a static, steady state thing. The environment is subject to what happens to the environment as a result of the organisms within it. So in the same way that plankton over many, many, many billions of years, or however many millions of years, altered the chemistry of the planet Earth, well, all of a sudden that organism had an effect on the future environment of all of the organisms that live inside that biosphere. So it is from my view.
I'll give you the point.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just suggesting that like it is not that constrained. There's so much that happens. I'm not saying people aren't fucking stuff up. I'm all here for it. But I've talked about this guy in podcasts before. There's a guy, I think his name is Charles Mann, Mann. And I might be getting this wrong. I might be messing up his first name, but he gave this great talk at the Long Now, and it was about I'm probably going to mess up some of the things, some of the exact percentages and whatever, but he said that if you look at the San Francisco Bay, something like 70 to 75% of the flora and fauna in the San Francisco Bay is completely introduced. It's all non-native. It's all like, and how did it get there? It was the ballast of ships. Okay, so when ships would sail from, England, and then they'd go down around the point of South America, and they'd come up on the other side on the west coast of the United States, and then they'd empty their ballasts when they landed in California, and they'd empty the water or the dirt. Sometimes it was water and sometimes it was dirt, depending on where they were sailing and what they were using. And they would empty that where they would dock. Well, all of a sudden, all those animals and all that fauna that got sucked up into the ballast, they put in their ship to keep it balanced when they left England, is now in the San Francisco Bay. And they did the same thing. That's how earthworms got here. Earthworms got here in the ballasts of ships. Earthworms are not a native North American species. Neither are honeybees, right? So we've had the globe is a constantly changing and moving and adjusting little microcosm. And the idea that there is like this place that's pure and pristine and untouched is a complete farce, and it's just not real. That there's constant exchange. Now, I will grant that, of course, like, yeah, it seems like things are happening a lot faster now, and like with human involvement, that change is happening at like this really rapid pace. And I'm not, obviously, I don't know enough to know whether or not that's good or bad long term. I have no idea. It's just not, that's not where I don't have the knowledge to adjudicate whether or not that's true, false, like whatever. It's just not me. But my hunch is that the ways we are changing things, I don't want to talk globally because I don't want to get political or anything like that. That's not really where I want to go. But like my hunch is that the ways that we're changing things, in about 1,000 years, people are going to look back and be like, wow, they really changed stuff. But that's all they're going to say. They're just going to say things changed. It's not to make a value judgment on it, to say that a dingo, like dingoes are not native to Australia. They were completely introduced, but they've become naturalized in the eyes of biologists. So this is, again, this is a way of discussing the ways in which it's all about personal worldview and personal perspective and choice. And so again, I want there to be pure Fiji iguanas and pure anthill pythons and pure diamond pythons and pure ball pythons. I want all of it to be there. But there are no such things except for like crocodiles that have just been here forever, unchanged as they were. That is the rarity. That is the least common thing on Earth, is something that's been here forever, really, on some level. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn. There might be people who argue that like archaea and plankton and whatever have been here forever and whatever. But for the most part,
wrong. I think if you look at the statistics, 99.9% of every single species is extinct now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yeah,
I think you're right.
And if it got selected out, well, maybe that's less of a statement about what was done to it and more about what it couldn't adapt to. It's just sort of like a natural. I mean, that's a little dark. It's a little dark to talk about it that way.
It also could have evolved into something else with something else, and then made its own thing. But then that eventually splits into 4 different species because it expands and then gets isolated again.
And we want it to happen this way. Like we want, part of what draws us to the things that we keep is that this animal is so cool, and I want it to be that way. And it's sort of like a myopic view on some level, right? So like if I come to, again, we were talking about bearded dragons. So if I got into bearded dragons this year and I learned like, oh, it turns out all the bearded dragons we have are like a mix between 3 species of bearded dragon that all kind of intermingled 40, 50 years ago, and is sort of the way it is. I might come into that cognitively just saying like, this is sort of the way things are. And I might have the view that like, that's the way it always was. Right. But that's the same thing that happens to us when we get a shipment of Uromastyx into herpetoculture. We say these ornates that came out of Jordan, this is the way they've always been, and this is the way they always ought to be. But the reality is tomorrow we could have some natural event or disaster or whatever that introduces a whole mess of Egyptian uromastics into the range of ornate uromastics. And now all of a sudden we have an otherwise, quote, natural intergradation event. And the argument that we might make a distinction between whether it happens because of a hurricane or an earthquake or a flood or whatever, like whatever happens in the natural world, that's somehow different. What if it was something else? What if it was a bird? What if some random albatross carried a lizard from South America to Fiji and it just happened? It was just an accident. We wouldn't think about that as a loss, right? Like when the Fiji iguanas that ended up there, if they ended up that, like, the idea is that, like, whatever the common ancestor of the Fiji iguana was, which somehow was most closely related to the desert iguana, like, go figure how that works, right? Genetically speaking, but like
they do look, they are
they
kind
do
of
look
like
like
that.
a they do
And
look like a
then when
desert
you look
iguana.
at the Galapagos stuff, that
Yeah,
stuff's like, it's bigger, but it
yeah.
also has that similar kind of, like, it doesn't have like the green iguana head shape.
No, it's
It's almost like a
Cacrix.
gigantic Fiji
Looks
that's
like a
like adapted.
rhinoceros
Well,
iguana.
it was a Cacrix. It's the Cacrix Alfred Schmidti and Defensor are the closest mainland relatives to the Galapagos land iguana. Okay, so like,
Oh, that's cool.
so let's say if we know through genetic
Those are going
analysis,
on CITES 1,
totally
apparently.
right, which
I just saw a CITES post. They're going to try to elevate the land and the Marines to CITES 1
they
because
should.
there's that, what is it? Somebody commented on it. They're like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, they're except for that one guy in Uganda that
yeah.
was
Thomas
originally in
Price.
Switzerland.
Thomas Price is his name. Yeah, he's got the CTC Conservation Center in Uganda. Yeah, so Thomas Price did that. But at any rate, the like, let's say if we acknowledge that the desert iguana is the closest mainland relative to the Fiji iguana, what would happen if somehow, let's just pretend that somehow a desert iguana or a green iguana ended up on a floating piece of trees and whatever detritus, and it ended up on Fiji today, and it was a natural event. It would not be, or at least I think people would not see it as a catastrophe. But if a person did it, if some kid, some 7-year-old kid who didn't know any better, took a green iguana and put it in his backpack and got to Fiji and let it out, it'd be an absolute environmental disaster. And I guess I'm trying to say that from my view, I'm not sure those two things are all that different. Again, I'm sure I'm not right. I'm sure people are gonna be like, "You're full of shit, dude. That's crazy." But
in a philosophical way, it is the same thing, right? Like,
it's the same thing.
we are a part of the global.
Yeah,
How do we say this? The global
biosphere.
biosphere, right?
Yeah.
So
But
like
we have the
it's all one thing
intelligence
still.
to know
It's all
better.
like cities
Well,
are just like a new
but that's just
biome
it.
kind of thing.
But that's just it, Dom. Because so you say we have the intelligence to know better, but know better what? What are we losing? Just because, so there's as we said before, there's countless species that have been, again, just to be clear, I want to preserve. I obviously, like, of course, like, I want to see Fiji iguanas around forever. Like, of course, pure ones. Okay, so of course, obviously, I say I want to see that, but like, it is, I think, from my view, it might be hubristic to think that we know better, that somehow we know that you shouldn't take a green iguana and put it onto Fiji. And I'm not sure we know. I'm not convinced that we know for sure that that's a net negative forever. And it may be, maybe it is, I don't know. But
It might not be a negative, right? And in nature,
yeah,
if that did happen, for all you know, maybe that iguana will breed to a couple of females, and then slowly the genes of the blue iguana will slowly take over. And for all you know, they might slowly eradicate everything from the green iguana,
yeah,
or they might evolve into a different species that is this
yeah,
hybridized new thing that will become the new thing. And
yeah,
naturally, that's what happens all the time, right? So that's a natural process. I'm simply implying that
yeah.
if I'm in Australia right now and I'm breeding Bredleys,
Hmm.
Bredley Python, and I live in Cairns,
Yeah.
And I let go of my Bredli python in the wild, and I let go a whole clutch of them.
Yeah.
And they start breeding with the local population of jungles there, let's say, or the Jaltons or whatever is around there. Like,
Sure.
That is not natural. That would not be, that would, and if I let out enough, that they would end up taking over and all that.
Sure.
Now, I'm just implying that I don't think we should have this God complex where we're allowed to control all these things. And I find that's where it makes it wrong, is that we have the intelligence to know better, and that we shouldn't do that. Right?
I totally agree. Except again, there's going to be two areas where I'm
the occasional accidents where it would be natural, like say, like, I don't know, native peoples go and for some reason they move, and like you said with the iguanas, or maybe a snake hitchhikes in their backpack and they drop it off. Like, they walk for 7 days and they drop it off somewhere else.
Well, you look at the Polynesian, right? You look at the Polynesian people who left from, Malaysia, Southeast Asia, who then populated all of the Polynesian islands. They brought chickens, pigs, and dogs. And so we would, like, there's a whole group of people who would suggest that, well, the native people did it's fine because they're natives. Well, but that's like it's a little bit of an arbitrary distinction, but let me get a little. So first of all, I would even be willing to say that if it's okay, holy crap, I'm kind of lost my train of thought. So I would say that even if it's not natural, like, let's pretend it's, if we're just talking about wild places, okay, if we're talking about Fiji, don't put anything there, right? Keep it as pristine as you can, leave it as uninterfered by human hands as possible. But when we're talking about inside our houses, well, now it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, because you can have both. You can have your natural Fijis and your hybrid Fijis, like, have whatever you want. You can have anything you want. If we're talking about the island of Fiji, keep it pure, keep it pristine as you want. Go nuts, right? But I have a fundamental, I personally take issue with the idea that there is somehow something different about people. That, from my view, people are just as natural, just as animalistic, just as organic as a floating pile of leaves and trees. There's the idea that we are different and distinct from. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the distinction between wild and otherwise. Like, when is something wild and when is something not? Are the spiny iguanas that live on the grounds of the hotel in Costa Rica, but they're eating non-native foods, non-native grasses, eating food that people hand out to them? Like, that's no longer a wild animal. Now we have something different. We have something interfered with by human hands. Well, okay, is the fact that it's still a pure Tenosura similis and still living a mostly wild life, does that not matter? Is that somehow just as valuable as the untouched thing? Well, okay, people might argue not, right? But I don't see the difference. I don't see why, as soon as you put the human into the equation, now we're talking about something either less good or unethical or whatever. I don't. That's the part where I might disagree. Now, I will say that I totally understand, I grasp why people feel like it's different, right? Because if it wasn't for us, it wouldn't look that way. But I think this is a feature of human culture and psychology that we are projecting onto the world around us. There's native groups wouldn't have given a fuck. Native groups moved animals all the time, and there was no conception of, like, oh my God, this one's not native over here. Like, we can't put pigs on this island. They'll kill everything. Well, they were like, we got to fucking eat, man. But it's not somehow less or more ethical because it was done by a native person as it was to someone who was not. These are distinctions that we make based on human feelings, not necessarily
selfish action, right? it's a selfish action based on
Sure.
one person without reflection of what the future holds, right? Like if you look in Australia, why is there rabbits there? Because
Oh,
a
sure.
guy went there and said, I like to hunt rabbits, and released what,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
13 rabbits, I think.
Yeah.
13 rabbits turned into how many millions of rabbits now, right? And
Sure.
why? Because he just wanted to hunt rabbits, right? Or if you
Sure.
look at why, like Lisa said, the cane toads, I believe the cane toads was done in order to eradicate the cane beetle, which was probably
Yeah.
done with some scientific research in the background, with the thought of, we're doing this for good, we're doing this probably with a certain
Yeah.
amount of study or background or research, and it still amounted to a gigantic fiasco that it is right now. So
Absolutely.
in the end, again, should we have the right to do that? Is it like, generally speaking, the introduction of a different species, a different habitat will cause mayhem, right? It'll either eradicate itself,
short-term
or it'll either
mayhem.
eradicate everything else or something else, right?
Yeah. And again, short-term mayhem in the wild is something I'm willing to bet we shouldn't do, right? So again, now we're talking again. We've gone back to the distinction between wild and not, right? So if we're talking about wild places, wild environments, then yes, I would agree that I absolutely agree that we should minimize the effect we have on that natural environment. Of course, despite all the things I've said, I agree with that. But again, the second we move into this is a lizard or a snake that I'm looking at in my house for completely other reasons and rationale, it doesn't hold the same weight anymore, at least to me. I'm not saying it doesn't hold weight to other people, and I'm not saying it shouldn't hold weight to other people. I'm just saying that unless we can get to some raw foundational reason why this is just bad, not just I prefer it another way, if we can get, go ahead, please.
I'll agree with you for
Yeah.
all animals that we can get still the wild type imported in. The ones you cannot, there is a lot of bad in there, right? So you can hybridize all your species as long as I can still take it from the wild and bring in pure, and we can still have all those things. But for the species where the wild cannot be brought in anymore, the more we muddy the water, the more and more it reduces the chances of keeping said pure species. Right?
Why are the future unborn keepers of herpetoculture entitled to pure African rock pythons? Why does it matter? Why at what substantive level does it matter that a future herpetoculturist has access to a pure African rock python and not an African rock python berm hybrid? Why does it matter to them? Why is it a moral choice to keep it pure for that future herpetoculturist? Why does that matter?
They can experience the hate of an African rock python.
That's good. That's really good. That's good.
But yeah, I think where the fuck was I gonna go with that?
This is so good. I love this. This is awesome.
This is awesome.
Great.
I
love
think
this.
They should have the right to be able to have it. Right?
Why?
And we are removing the right because that is what is in the wild.
Well, but
right?
so many people would argue that you're not
necessarily.
But so many people would argue that we aren't entitled to the pure wild thing. People would say, you're taking these animals out of the wild. You shouldn't take them out of the wild. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve any of this, whatever. Like, you shouldn't have that right. Why does a future herpetoculturist, why do they deserve the right to get a pure one as to another, an otherwise cross? Why does the purity of it matter?
Because the past herpetoculturists are the ones that gave me the right to have what I would consider pure or as close to pure Australian species, because other people cared enough to keep it so that I could do it. So therefore, if I stop doing it and everybody else stops doing it, we are removing the choice from everybody else after.
Yeah, right. But I agree with I would agree with that, but I would still say that doesn't change. I think it doesn't change my perspective that I can still do that. You, Dom, as yourself, you can still dedicate yourself and say, I'm going to ensure that these unborn herpetoculturists in 50 years will have the opportunity to work with a pure Bredl's python, because I'm going to breed pure, period. But just because there's someone else on the other side of the country making a hybrid, that doesn't eliminate the possibility of you doing the same thing. Whereas I also could take the exact same perspective that I don't want to deny a future herpetoculturist the opportunity to get exactly the kind of weird 10-way hybrid snake that they want. There's no reason that that's any less moral or less useful or valuable than the pure version in the future to that future herpetoculturist. And the way to ensure that we have more herpetoculturists in the future is to ensure that there are as many options for those future herpetoculturists to get involved in the future. If we limit the ways that they can get involved and say, if you would like to work with a large python species, you must have a pure African rock, a pure berm, a pure retic. Those are your only options. We are denying future herpetoculturists the choice of something different in the future too. So
but there's nothing wrong with something different. I have nothing wrong with people who do hybrids and make the craziest weird ass shit.
They're so cool.
But there's nothing wrong with that. My issue is I don't know. Let's take diamond pythons and a coastal. Mm-hmm. You are a jungle, right? You create this beautiful animal that looks very distinct.
Yeah.
But then they'll take that 50% diamond and breed it back to a diamond. Then you have a 75% diamond. Yeah. Okay, it's not looking that distinct anymore. Now it's getting hard to tell. Then they'll breed it again, and then they'll create 88% diamond. That's where the issue is, right? Sure. If you want to create that weird, crazy hybrid, go for it. I have no problems with that as long as it doesn't look like the real thing. You know what I mean? Like, and the problem is that people tend to be like, well, I can't breed a diamond python, so I'm going to breed it with a jungle because it's a lot easier. And then, if I breed it back to a diamond, now it's 75%. I can still manage to breed it like a jungle because it's too hard to cool it down. And then they try to do it that way, and that's where my issue is. I have no problem with a person doing it, but when it becomes that it looks like the real thing, or that's where the waters get muddied. That's where the problems become.
Okay.
And I have more. I'll tell you what, we're gonna shut down like pretty soon because I got to go to bed.
But I totally understand
because I work at 5 a.m. tomorrow.
So. No, sure. I recognize that we've been going a long time, and I respect your time, so I totally get it. But okay,
I'm old and I need to go to bed.
No, me too. I get it. I totally feel I'm so tired. But okay, I agree that there are there's no reason you shouldn't, like, I'm again totally down with pure species in the future. Obviously, it just goes without saying, right? What about in the situation where you have a limited number of founders? What happens when you only get 6 individuals there in the first place? And I say, okay, we only have 5 Eurymastix yemenensis in the United States.
Rough scale pythons, all originated from 5 or 6, and yet we have some everywhere now.
Sure. But again, so that tells us 2 things. One, we don't know that much about reptilian genetics and how resilient they are to inbreeding and whatever. That's a totally different conversation. But if we say, like, we only got 2 or 3 of these animals in the first place, we only got 1 male and 2 females. Well, all of a sudden now, if I have a very similar species and I say, I want to make sure that herpetoculturists in the future, 50 years from now, have the closest facsimile to Eurymastix yemenensis they can possibly get. And the only way for me to do that is to insert some new genetics in here, because otherwise we're encountering inbreeding depression and we're having lots of other problems. Like, I think, again, I think this is just a thing where there's so many ways, I think, to jab holes in this. Again, I don't mean that disrespectfully. Like, I totally get, I'm trying to find a way to balance out this whole argument that says we should have all of this. Like, I want all of it to be there, you know? And there's, and again, from my view, there's nothing that says just because we have a person over here producing something very different, doesn't mean that we can't have someone over here. Because you could make this, what if we make this argument just about all snakes? Well, I want to make sure that there are enough snakes in herpetoculture in the future for future herpetoculturists. Well, therefore, everyone should focus their efforts on pure corn snakes and pure corn snakes alone. Well, then we don't have anthill pythons. Yeah, please.
There's a bunch of corn snake morphs
Yeah.
that are hybrids with other rat snakes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You got
I know.
It's just cool to see. And then with like leopard geckos, like what I wanted to say earlier was that leopard geckos are like how many species all mixed together? Yeah. And honestly, like it's fine. Like I don't see it as anything different. Even with Kenyan sand boas, you got the Rafuskin mixed in there. Yeah. I would love to have just pure Rafuskin because there's a brown sand boa, a brown Kenyan or East African sand boa, but I believe they're different species or subspecies. Same with Dodoma, or a different locality or subspecies. But like we don't. Who knows if there's any actual like pure ones? And we've kind of accepted it almost at this point, where it's like, well, it is what it is. Yeah. It's a part of herpetoculture. They're cool. They look great, and they're close enough. So we've almost accepted this already as a hobby. Yeah. As them being a hybrid or intergrade or however you want to look at it. Right?
So again, I just think that I want to circle back to the idea that I really feel like it's important that we have all of it. I think that the more we can ensure the maximum amount of diversity in herpetoculture, the better. And that is everything from the people who are obsessed with knowing that their collared lizards came from the same 10-mile stretch of road in Southern California, and they all only originate from there. And that's the kind of that I love that. I love that. I love locality stuff. I think it's super cool. I think it's great. I also think it's cool when I see some weird 6-way colubrid. I think that's really interesting and very strange and deeply intriguing. The fact that they can all interproduce, like they can produce with one another, I think it's fascinating. So to try to close it out, all of it should be there. And so anyway, I know this has gone on for a good long time. This is great. So I'll stop now.
We're going to need another 2.5 hour episode. Yeah. Just talking about other stuff and more Uromastics. And
this is so cool.
Talk about Xenogama. Yes. Like, I remember the first time you went on Lizard Brain Radio.
Yep.
And then Smitty wanted you to talk about Xenogama, and Bill didn't even get to it.
Yes, sir.
Fuck. Honestly, I've thought about doing Xenogama, but then I don't know. I'm like mostly a snake guy too, although now I'm kind of getting back into fish. Like I've kept some lizards, but just like that, I got to go to the fish store. I got to go to the pet store every week to get crickets. Is just that like I am so busy, and it's just
When we really quick, would you guys be cool with cross-posting this? So like once this is all done,
I was already gonna offer it.
Okay, good. Yeah, send me the recording. I'd love to put this up on the Project Herpetoculture page, because this is a super cool conversation, and I love Dominic. I really appreciate you like pushing back on this. Like I love that. So thank you for that.
No worries. I'm pretty argumentative, just like you. So
me too. Yeah,
I did not realize this was going to go that way, but
it's good though. It's a good thing. It's great. You asked great questions, man.
I'm glad this went this way. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Yeah, I appreciate Phil you coming on. It was it was actually really entertaining.
It's
I
great.
probably should have went to bed like 45 minutes ago. I try to keep them around 2 hours. But tomorrow when I get up at 4 a.m., I'm just going to be like, fucking Phil.
Yeah. That guy Phil is such an asshole, dude. He thinks he knows everything. He thinks he's so goddamn smart because he always has a fucking rebuttal. This guy.
But, your rebuttals they're polite and they're accurate. Like, and they're always more like you're kind of weighing the options on both sides, which I respect. And I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree. I just think that there is always a better way to do it. And I think we should all strive for the better, because there's a lot of people not doing the better.
Sure.
So the more people
couldn't agree more,
the better it will be for the hobby in the future.
I could not agree more. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hell yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mike, are you good to start closing it out, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think we can close it out. Although we definitely have to have Phil on again, because fantastic.
Totally.
It's like every like I'm sure Phil, you realize that like every guest you get on, you're like, fuck, I need another 2 hours. Like we had Rob Stone on last week and Eric Burke the week before.
Dude, Rob is
Rob
so
Stone
good.
is just like so great. Same with Scott Eipers. It's like we talked to Scott and then we just went into like UV. We talked about UV for like an hour, and it was like, and then, so like when we get him and Ty on, hopefully next week, it's gonna be like, okay, we want to talk about maybe some actual keeping and maybe some authorship. It's just the podcasting thing in itself is super cool. Maybe next time we can just talk about that too. So
I'd love that. Rob lives near here. He and I live real close to one another, actually. So he's brilliant. I love listening to that guy talk. He also has he's a very thoughtful person. So I'll have to go back and listen to that one. That's great. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a super cool conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Phil, you want to just drop your contact info, anything from your podcast, and if anybody wants to reach out to you.
Yes. So it's for my personal work, it's just Arids only, anywhere. So Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, the whole thing, aridsonly.com. Project Herpetoculture. You can find it on the Animals at Home Network. We're under there with Dylan and his Animals at Home podcast, and then the Reptiles and Research podcast. We're all kind of under the same network, talking about some of the cool, some interesting stuff. So yeah, that's that.
Very cool. For Michael Gillian on Facebook, and on Instagram, it would be Reptiles Rejects. He's the one who kind of governs that page. So if anybody wants to reach out to him, go for it through that way. For the podcast, Reptile Rejects, you can find it pretty much on any podcast service and on YouTube. Please subscribe, click all those little thumbs up buttons and all that. For myself, Dom's Reptiles on Instagram or my website, and Dominic Cabano on Facebook. To everybody listening that actually suffered through our ranting for 2 hours and 55 minutes, we thank you.
There's still 4 people.
There's still 4 people. To the 4 people, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Phil, that was awesome. Honestly, great guest. We will definitely have you back on. And to everybody else, thank you.